The night was cold, a thick fog wrapping around the streets of Konoha like a suffocating blanket. A sense of dread hung in the air, palpable even in the soft winds that carried whispers through the trees. Inside the Hokage's mansion, Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage of Konoha, stood by the bedside of his wife, Kushina Uzumaki. Her face was flushed, covered in beads of sweat, yet her eyes gleamed with an unspoken joy, despite the pain that clenched her body. Tonight, she would give birth to their child, a moment they had both been eagerly waiting for. Yet, for all the love and anticipation that filled the room, something more sinister stirred in the shadows. Minato's face was etched with concern as he looked down at his wife. "It won't be long now, Kushina. Just hold on a little longer." Kushina's breath came in short, sharp gasps as she squeezed his hand. "I know, Minato. But I'm scared." Her voice trembled, and her eyes flickered toward the window, where a storm seemed to gather. "I feel like something is wrong." Minato had no time to reassure her, no time to comfort her. As if the very air had thickened with her words, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A distant roar echoed through the night, a monstrous sound that shattered the peace of Konoha like glass. The Nine Tails, Kurama, had appeared. Minato's heart sank as he recognized the unmistakable roar of the beast. He turned toward the door. "Stay here, Kushina. I'll take care of this. Just focus on bringing our child into the world." Kushina's eyes widened in horror. "Minato. Don't." But he was already gone, rushing toward the village gates to confront the beast. The weight of the moment settled heavily on her shoulders, but she couldn't afford to be distracted. She would bring their son into the world, no matter the cost. In the darkness outside the mansion, chaos unfolded. The Nine Tails rampaged through the village, its massive form casting an eerie shadow over the streets. The villagers scrambled in panic, helpless against the overwhelming force. The Hokage's voice was the only command that pierced the air, rallying the shinobi to defend their home, but it was clear that the battle was already lost. Inside the Hokage mansion, Kushina's cries of pain echoed through the halls. Her body shook violently as she pushed, the baby's arrival drawing nearer. She gritted her teeth, sweat pouring from her brow, her hair matted to her face. But in that moment, as she fought to give life to her son, something else began to stir, a disturbance in the air, something unnatural. In the distance, far beyond the reach of Konoha's walls, a cosmic force disrupted the very fabric of existence. The events of the night were not just a coincidence, they were the result of a far deeper disturbance. A soul had been displaced, ripped from its rightful place in time and space. It was the soul of Shisui Uchiha. Shisui, the prodigy of the Uchiha clan, had fallen tragically in the past, his life snuffed out in an instant by the very forces he had once protected. His death had been a loss to Konoha, a man who had once embodied hope, peace, and the idea that even in the darkness, there could be light. But as fate would have it, his soul was not allowed to rest. The cosmic disturbance, caused by forces far beyond the comprehension of the shinobi, had pulled Shisui's spirit from the afterlife, binding it to an infant. And as Kushina's final scream filled the night air, the soul of Shisui Uchiha found its new home inside the newborn Naruto Uzumaki. The transfer was seamless, unnoticed by all but the forces that had caused it. There were no signs, no warnings. Just the shifting of a soul from one existence to another, a new life beginning, and an old one unwilling to fade away. Kushina gasped as the final push brought their son into the world. A boy with messy blonde hair and a face twisted in pain, his cries filling the room. The moment was filled with overwhelming joy and sorrow, but it was also marked by a subtle unease. Neither Minato nor Kushina had any idea that their son was more than just a child born to them. He was the vessel for a soul that had once been lost. Minato arrived just moments later, bloodied from his battle with the Nine Tails, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the beast still roamed free. He burst through the door, his eyes scanning the room for his wife and son. But what he saw first was Kushina's exhausted but relieved smile as she held their child. "We did it, Minato," she whispered, her voice weak but filled with pride. "Our son." Minato approached, kneeling beside her and gazing down at his newborn son. His face softened with love as he caressed the baby's cheek. But even in this moment of joy, something unsettled him. There was a faint, almost imperceptible tremor in the air, a shift in the room that he couldn't explain. "Something's wrong," Minato muttered, though he could not place what it was. Kushina blinked at him, concerned. "What do you mean?" Minato hesitated. He had no evidence, no proof of what he was feeling, but deep down, he knew that something had changed. And it wasn't just the presence of the nine tails, sealed deep within the child they had just brought into the world. No, there was something more, something that defied explanation. Outside the village, the battle with the nine tails raged on, but Minato's focus was entirely on his son, the boy in his arms. As he held the infant, he felt a strange connection to him, stronger than anything he had ever felt before. It was as if the child was not just his son, but also a force in his own right, a force that was shifting the balance of everything around him. With the seal in place, the nine tails chakra sealed within their son, Minato, and Kushina shared a look of silent understanding. They had done it. They had protected their child, and they had protected Konoha. But they couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. As the night drew on and the village settled into uneasy silence, Kushina and Minato's thoughts turned toward their son. The boy, whose bright blue eyes blinked up at them, unaware of the storm that raged outside. Unaware of the storm that had also begun to stir within him. The soul of Shisui Uchiha had integrated into Naruto's being, leaving an imprint on the child's mind and heart. It was a force that neither Kushina nor Minato could comprehend, a force that would shape the course of Naruto's life in ways that would only become clear in time. And in that time, the world would come to know that Naruto Uzumaki was not just the child of prophecy, the son of Minato and Kushina. He was something far more dangerous, something that no one could predict. The child was not only the vessel for the nine tails but the reincarnation of a fallen Uchiha. A soul that had been lost, but now found its way into the very heart of Konoha's future. A future that would never be the same again. As the village of Konoha began to heal, the seeds of conflict and chaos were quietly being sown within the child they had so desperately hoped would be their salvation. The air was thick with unease, and the villagers, unaware of the true nature of the child, went about their lives as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. And in the heart of the innocent Naruto Uzumaki, the echo of Shisui Uchiha's soul began to stir, marking the beginning of a new path, a path that would ultimately lead him to question everything he knew, everything he was. The night of Naruto's birth was just the beginning. Naruto Uzumaki had always been a troublemaker. The villagers of Konoha whispered about him in hushed tones as he darted through the streets, his messy blonde hair barely visible above the crowd. No matter how hard he tried to fit in, he was always an outcast, a reminder of the nine tails that had devastated the village years ago. But there was something else, something different about Naruto, something that made him stand apart from other children. Even from an early age, he exhibited abilities that should have been beyond the reach of any ordinary child. At 6 years old, Naruto was already faster than most of the academy's upperclassmen. His reflexes were sharp, honed like a blade forged in the fires of a distant world. His eyes would flicker in strange ways, shifting with a sense of awareness far beyond his years. To the untrained eye, he seemed like a prodigy, a child destined for greatness. But Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that there was something wrong with him. His abilities, his strength, felt foreign, almost as if they didn't belong to him. On a warm spring morning, the academy grounds were alive with the sounds of children practicing their jutsu, their laughter mixing with the occasional thud of a body hitting the dirt. The sensei, a young but skilled ninja, called for a sparring match. Naruto's classmates were all eager to show off their skills, but Naruto didn't share their enthusiasm. The other children often treated him with disdain, their eyes narrowing whenever he entered the dojo. He could feel the weight of their judgment, a heaviness that seemed to press down on him more and more as time passed. Naruto stepped into the ring, his heart pounding in his chest. The opponent, a boy named Kenji, sneered at him. Kenji was a few years older and much more skilled than Naruto. He had long been a source of mockery for Naruto, a boy who always found ways to make him feel small. But today, Naruto wasn't sure why he felt so different. The air felt charged, as if something was building within him, something he couldn't control. Kenji began with a quick burst of speed, launching a series of kunai toward Naruto. Naruto's body reacted instinctively, dodging and weaving between the blades, his movements fluid and precise. Kenji's eyes widened in surprise, but he quickly recovered, charging forward with a well-timed punch. Naruto's body moved on its own, stepping aside just in time to avoid the blow. The crowd of academy students gasped as he effortlessly countered, sweeping Kenji's legs from under him. Naruto blinked, his mind racing. He had never moved like that before, not with such ease. It was almost as if his body was responding to something deeper than just instinct. But before he could process it further, Kenji was on his feet again, more determined than ever to land a hit. Naruto's pulse quickened. Something inside him was awakening, a strange energy building in his chest. He didn't understand it, but he felt it. And when Kenji lunged forward again, something inside Naruto snapped. His eyes shifted, narrowing as the world around him seemed to slow down. The moment Kenji's face came into his line of sight, Naruto's Sharingan activated almost instinctively. His pupils spiraled in a mesmerizing pattern, and for a fleeting moment, time itself seemed to pause. He could see the world in greater detail now, every twitch of Kenji's muscles, every slight shift in his posture. It wasn't just Kenji he saw the underlying intent, the fear, the frustration. He saw it all. Kenji's body froze, his expression blank as Naruto's chakras surged and wrapped around him, pulling him into an illusion. Naruto didn't even realize what he was doing. The genjutsu was so natural, so effortless, that it almost felt like breathing. Kenji struggled against it, his hands twitching as if trying to break free, but the illusion held him tight. Naruto's heart pounded as he took in the sight before him, his thoughts disjointed and fragmented. As Kenji's struggles grew weaker, a flood of images flooded Naruto's mind, images that didn't belong to him. In an instant, he found himself standing in a different place, a place unfamiliar yet strangely comforting. He could see a young Uchiha Shisui standing before him, the same dark eyes staring back at him, though the vision was clouded in shadows. Who is this? The images shifted, and Naruto saw flashes of Shisui's life, the boy's unwavering loyalty to Konoha, his love for his clan, and the deep bond he shared with his cousin, Itachi. There was a quiet sadness behind his eyes, a sense of duty that weighed heavily on his shoulders. Then, the images shifted again, and Naruto found himself standing at the edge of a cliff, watching as Shisui, with a look of sorrow on his face, took his own life. The image left Naruto with a deep sense of loss, a pain he couldn't quite understand but felt in his very soul. The visions faded as quickly as they had come, and Naruto was left standing in the academy ring, staring at Kenji, whose body was now slack and unmoving. The genjutsu had dissipated, but Naruto's heart still raced. His Sharingan remained active, spinning in his eyes like a storm. He shook his head, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just happened. "Hey, Naruto, what did you do?" a voice called out from the sidelines. It was one of the academy instructors, his voice tinged with awe and a hint of fear. Naruto didn't answer. He couldn't. His mind was still reeling from the experience. The vision of Shisui, the strange connection he felt to the Uchiha, lingered like a heavy fog in his thoughts. It was as if the very essence of Shisui's life had been etched into his soul. But it didn't make sense. How could this be? He was Naruto Uzumaki, a boy hated by the villagers, a child who had been burdened with the power of the Nine Tails. These memories, these feelings, were they his? Were they even real? Naruto, are you okay? The instructor's voice snapped him out of his trance. The other students were looking at him now, their faces a mixture of confusion and fear. Kenji was still on the ground, his body unmoving, though he was alive. The instructor stepped forward, his hand resting on Naruto's shoulder. That was a powerful genjutsu. How did you do it? Naruto looked at him, his gaze vacant. I don't know. His voice was hollow, as though he was speaking from a distance. The more he tried to understand, the further away the answers seemed. As the academy instructor helped Kenji to his feet, Naruto's thoughts spiraled. The world around him seemed to blur as the fragments of Shisui's life danced in his mind. The Uchiha spirit had somehow merged with his own, leaving behind a series of memories that didn't fit into the life he had lived. It was as if he was being pulled in two different directions, one by the weight of the Nine Tails' power and the other by the lingering presence of Shisui Uchiha. Naruto stumbled backward, his body feeling like it was no longer his own. His breath hitched in his chest as he tried to make sense of the overwhelming sensations coursing through him. What's happening to me? The answer was simple, though it eluded him for now. Naruto was no longer just Naruto. He was a vessel, a body that housed not only the chakra of the Nine Tails but the spirit of a fallen Uchiha, a soul that had been displaced by forces beyond anyone's comprehension. And as these forces continued to intertwine within him, Naruto would find himself torn between two identities, two destinies, both leading him down a path that would change the world forever. The villagers hated him. The children at the academy feared him. But Naruto knew one thing for certain: he was different, and the power within him would only continue to grow, unraveling truths that had long been hidden. The first signs of his true strength had awakened, and they would shape the future in ways no one could anticipate. The days at the academy passed like a blur, but for Naruto, every moment felt sharp, like a needle pricking at his soul. On the outside, he was still the mischievous troublemaker that everyone knew him to be. He would make faces at his classmates, pull pranks, and loudly proclaim his desire to become Hokage someday, the same boy who had always craved attention and recognition. But on the inside, something had changed. The world felt off, as though it were a puzzle with pieces that didn't fit together. Every time he closed his eyes, memories of a life he didn't live surged through his mind: visions of blood-stained battles, moments of quiet contemplation, and a profound sense of loss. The memories of Shisui Uchiha had settled deep within him, like fragments of an old, broken mirror. He could feel Shisui's emotions, his pride, his regrets, and his duty to Konoha, and the weight of those memories pressed down on Naruto like an invisible hand. It was as though Shisui's life was bleeding into his own, and Naruto had no choice but to accept it. Naruto found himself lost in thought during the academy lessons, his mind drifting away from the childish banter and distractions of his peers. He would often find himself staring at his hands, wondering what had changed, what had become of him. It wasn't just the Sharingan or the genjutsu that he now instinctively knew how to use, it was something deeper. A part of him felt like he wasn't truly himself, as though he were a vessel carrying someone else's history. In the quiet solitude of his home at night, Naruto began to practice in secret. He would sit cross-legged on his floor, his mind emptying itself of distractions as he focused on the chakra flowing through his body. He had learned from experience that the world was full of hidden truths, truths that most people were too scared to face. And if he wanted to understand who he truly was, he would have to uncover those truths himself. He had always been able to create basic jutsu, but now, with the memories of Shisui swirling within him, he found himself mastering techniques at an alarming rate. The genjutsu he had used on Kenji during their sparring match was just the beginning. At night, when the academy's sounds faded into silence, Naruto would close his eyes and channel his chakra, slipping into a deep meditative state. His hands would form the familiar seals of the Sharingan, and the world around him would shift. He could manipulate reality, bending it to his will. At first, it was just minor illusions misdirecting a passerby or making his reflection change in the mirror. But soon, his abilities grew stronger. He could weave complex genjutsu, creating entire worlds in his mind that felt just as real as the one he inhabited. Sometimes, he would practice his combat techniques too, using a combination of advanced taijutsu and manipulation of his surroundings to simulate battles in his head. He fought against shadows, against imaginary enemies who seemed to know exactly how to counter his moves. In the academy, Naruto continued to perform his usual antics, making everyone laugh, showing off in the most ridiculous ways. But behind the scenes, he began to understand the deeper art of manipulation. He had a knack for reading people, for understanding their weaknesses, and it was something that came so naturally to him now. Whether in a classroom discussion or during a sparring match, Naruto could predict the actions of those around him with startling accuracy. It was as if he could hear their inner thoughts, even when they weren't speaking. He could feel their insecurities, their desires, and it gave him the power to bend them to his will. One afternoon, during a particularly frustrating lesson, Naruto had an interaction with one of the academy instructors. The man had been lecturing about strategy in combat, but Naruto wasn't paying much attention. Instead, his mind wandered, as it often did. He observed the instructor, the way his eyes darted from student to student, his nervous smile, and the slight trembling of his hands as he wrote on the chalkboard. Naruto couldn't help but see the cracks, the vulnerability. He could sense the fear hidden beneath the man's confident exterior. "Sensei," Naruto said lazily, leaning back in his chair with his feet up on the desk. "You know, if you wanted to make this class more interesting, you could try something a little more hands-on." The instructor paused and glanced at him, confusion flickering across his face. "What do you mean, Naruto?" Naruto smirked, his voice casual but carrying an edge. "Well, your strategy lecture is fine, but it's kind of boring. Maybe a demonstration would help us understand better. Show us how it's done." "Fight me." A few students laughed nervously, unsure of how to react. The instructor hesitated, then looked around at the class. "Naruto, I don't think. I'm serious." Naruto's voice dropped lower, carrying an intensity that made the room fall silent. "Let's see if you can beat me. It'll be a good learning experience for everyone, right?" There was a brief pause, and then the instructor, eager to prove himself, stood up and stepped forward. The students watched with a mix of excitement and apprehension. Naruto wasn't known for his fighting skills, but they all knew his mouth often got him into trouble. However, this time, there was something different about him. Something unsettling. The instructor assumed a defensive stance, and Naruto mimicked him with ease. The students were on edge, whispering amongst themselves. Naruto's eyes glinted with a strange, unsettling calmness as the battle began. The fight was a blur. The instructor attempted a few basic jutsu, trying to catch Naruto off guard, but the boy moved like he had already anticipated every move. His strikes were calculated, his every step measured. The instructor's movements began to slow as Naruto effortlessly dodged and countered, each maneuver more precise than the last. And then, in a moment of sheer instinct, Naruto's eyes flared open, revealing the Sharingan. His opponent's body froze, the instructor's features locking into a state of absolute stillness. The entire room seemed to hold its breath as the instructor stood motionless, caught in Naruto's genjutsu. For a moment, the world inside the illusion seemed to collapse, the walls warping as Naruto's voice echoed in the instructor's mind. "You know you can't defeat me. Why even try?" Naruto's words were like a knife twisting inside the instructor's mind, planting seeds of doubt, paralyzing him with fear. When the illusion finally lifted, the instructor stumbled back, eyes wide with disbelief, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The room was silent, the students exchanging wary glances. Naruto chuckled, his usual carefree demeanor slipping back into place. Guess I won, huh? Maybe next time, you'll take me more seriously. The instructor, his face pale, quickly regained composure, but it was clear that he was shaken. He muttered something about further practice and hastily dismissed the class, eager to avoid further confrontation. Naruto, however, didn't feel victorious. As the students trickled out of the room, his mind wandered again. He could still hear the echoes of Shisui's voice in his thoughts, the deep sense of duty and sacrifice. He had just manipulated a teacher, controlled the situation effortlessly, and yet, the victory felt hollow. There was a part of him deep down that knew he was beginning to lose himself in this newfound power. But the power felt good, too. Better than he had ever imagined. The manipulation, the control, the ability to sway people with nothing more than his presence, it was intoxicating. And it was just the beginning. Naruto knew that this path, the one he was walking, was one of secrecy and shadows. He was no longer just the loud, goofy kid everyone loved to mock. He was becoming something else, something far more dangerous. But even as he honed his power, there was a deep sense of unease gnawing at him. The more he embraced the abilities of Shisui, the more he felt like he was drifting away from who he truly was. The line between Naruto Uzumaki and Shisui Uchiha was blurring, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold on to his own identity. The path ahead was dark, and Naruto had no idea where it would lead. But one thing was certain: he would not walk it alone. Naruto sat alone beneath the pale light of the moon, his back against the rough bark of an ancient tree. The wind whispered through the branches, but his mind was far away, lost in the sea of his own thoughts. His hands rested on his knees, fingers tracing the faint, familiar seal patterns as if by instinct. Each line, each curve, felt like a thread tying him to something larger, something older. The Sharingan had become a part of him now. It had awakened during his sparring match, but it didn't feel like an accident. The memories, Shisui's memories, had flooded his mind ever since. The Uchiha's tragic past, their internal conflict, their downfall. These images haunted his dreams, flashing before his eyes in bursts of color and sound. He had seen Shisui's final moments, his resolve, his sacrifice for the sake of Konoha. The weight of the past threatened to crush him, but Naruto had learned to live with it. He couldn't fight it, couldn't deny it anymore. The memories had become too vivid, too real. Lately, as he meditated more deeply, he could feel Shisui's presence within him. It wasn't just in the quiet of the night or during the hazy, fleeting moments between sleep and wakefulness. It was in the very air he breathed, in every pulse of chakra that coursed through him. Shisui's memories were beginning to merge with his own, and Naruto could no longer ignore the call of the Uchiha legacy that resonated deep within his soul. Shisui had been a man torn between duty and personal desires, bound by a sense of loyalty to Konoha that Naruto had never truly felt. Konoha had cast him aside, treated him as little more than a tool, a weapon. They saw him as a demon, a pariah, and while Naruto had grown accustomed to the disdain of the villagers, the truth of his origins left him conflicted. Shisui had given his life to protect the village, but would Naruto, the boy who had inherited his legacy, follow in his footsteps? It was in these quiet, solitary moments that Naruto truly confronted his inner turmoil. He felt a strange kinship with the Uchiha clan, its history, its struggles, its pain. And yet, there was a dark pull that tugged at him, a rebellion against the very village that had rejected him. He didn't know which path he would walk, whether he would embrace the Uchiha legacy or burn it to the ground, but one thing was certain: he was no longer the naive, carefree boy he had once been. The next day, the tension in the air was palpable as Naruto made his way to the academy. He wasn't sure what had brought him here, but something about today felt different. As he entered the academy courtyard, his eyes scanned the familiar faces of his classmates. His gaze lingered on Sasuke Uchiha, the boy who had become the center of Naruto's growing unease. Sasuke stood alone, his hands tucked into his pockets, his eyes narrowed as he stared off into the distance. Naruto had always found Sasuke intriguing. The boy carried the weight of the Uchiha name with a quiet intensity, a bitterness that seemed to mirror his own. But it wasn't just the shared legacy that connected them, it was something deeper, something Naruto couldn't quite grasp. Sasuke's own past was a tragedy in its own right. The massacre of the Uchiha clan, the loss of his older brother, Itachi's betrayal, it had shaped Sasuke into a brooding, vengeful boy. Yet, Naruto saw something in him that made him feel like they were both caught in a similar web. Both of them were victims of fate, of forces beyond their control. As Naruto approached Sasuke, he couldn't help but feel a strange pull, a sense of recognition that was both familiar and unsettling. Sasuke's eyes flickered toward him, but Naruto didn't break his stride. "What's up, Sasuke?" Naruto called casually, though his voice betrayed the unease simmering beneath the surface. Sasuke didn't respond immediately. Instead, he studied Naruto with a narrowed gaze, his expression unreadable. "You're different," Sasuke finally muttered, his voice low. "I've been watching you. Your jutsu, they're not like the others." Naruto's pulse quickened. He didn't know how to explain it, the way Sasuke's words resonated within him. It was as though Sasuke had seen right through him, recognized something that even Naruto didn't fully understand. "What do you mean?" Naruto asked, though he already knew the answer. Sasuke stepped closer, his eyes never leaving Naruto's face. "Your Sharingan. It's too advanced for someone your age. And the way you fight, it's like you've been trained by someone far older than you." Sasuke paused, his gaze piercing. "You don't act like other people." Naruto's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't meant for Sasuke to notice, but he had. The connection, the power, the quiet understanding between them, it was undeniable. Naruto clenched his fists at his sides, trying to suppress the rising tide of emotions. He didn't want to admit to himself what he had already begun to suspect, that the memories of Shisui were not just fleeting thoughts, not just echoes of a distant past. They were shaping him, molding him into something else. "I'm not like other people," Naruto admitted, his voice steady, though his mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions. "But that doesn't mean I'm like you, either." Sasuke's lips twitched, a small smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. "We'll see about that." Without warning, Sasuke lunged forward, his speed nearly impossible to follow. Naruto's instincts kicked in, and before he knew it, his Sharingan activated, its three tomos spinning as he tracked Sasuke's every movement. The world slowed down, and Naruto could see Sasuke's attacks before they even reached him. The power coursing through him was undeniable, and he knew, with a deep, unsettling certainty, that this was just the beginning. The two of them clashed, their jutsu colliding in a flurry of light and sound. Sasuke was fast, but Naruto was faster. He dodged and countered with ease, his body moving fluidly, as if guided by the memories of someone long gone. Shisui's combat style, his grace, his calm was now a part of Naruto's very being, guiding his every move. But as the battle raged on, Naruto felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he wasn't just using the Sharingan. He was tapping into something deeper, something more personal. The memories of Shisui flooded his mind, his loyalty to Konoha, his relationship with Itachi, his tragic end. It was as if Naruto was becoming Shisui, embodying his spirit, his will. Sasuke faltered for a moment, his eyes widening in disbelief as he realized that Naruto was no longer just a student, no longer just another kid with a powerful eye. Naruto's presence had transformed into something more. It was like a wave crashing over him, and for a split second, Sasuke felt a sense of unease, as though he were facing something beyond his understanding. Naruto's movements were slow, deliberate, each strike more controlled than the last. He wasn't attacking Sasuke out of malice, but rather testing his own limits. He was no longer just the boy who had been rejected by Konoha. He was something more. He was Shisui Uchiha's reincarnation. The moment stretched on, both of them locked in an unspoken understanding. Sasuke's expression shifted, his curiosity turning to suspicion. "What are you?" he asked, his voice low, almost reverent. Naruto didn't answer right away. He was lost in the sensation of power that surged through him, the weight of Shisui's memories pressing down on him. "I'm not sure," he finally said, his voice distant. "But I'm starting to figure it out." Sasuke stared at him, his eyes filled with a mix of awe and wariness. For a moment, it felt like they were two sides of the same coin, two boys, each torn by the legacy of their clan, their history, and the choices they would one day have to make. The battle ended in a draw, but the connection between them had been made. Sasuke, always so guarded, would never forget this encounter. And neither would Naruto. The legacy of the Uchiha ran deep within both of them, and whether they liked it or not, their paths were now intertwined. As Naruto walked away from the confrontation, his mind was a swirl of conflicting thoughts. He felt both closer to Sasuke and further away from the village he had once called home. The legacy of the Uchiha was not one that could be easily ignored, and now, as the weight of Shisui's sacrifice rested heavily on his shoulders, Naruto knew that the path he had to walk was no longer just his own. It was a path that would lead him into darkness or to a place of redemption. Only time would tell which he would choose. Naruto sat in the dimly lit corner of his small, sparsely furnished room, the flickering candle casting long shadows on the walls. The cold air seeped through the cracks in the window, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, lost in the labyrinth of thoughts that had consumed him for weeks. The Sharingan had awakened within him fully, and with it, Shisui's memories, his thoughts, his ideals, his regrets. The power was intoxicating, a constant presence, gnawing at the edges of his consciousness. Tonight, the temptation felt stronger than ever. He hadn't meant to delve so deeply into his powers. At first, it had been small things testing the limits of his genjutsu, honing his speed. But the more he practiced, the more he realized just how much control he had over his own fate. The memories of Shisui's loyalty to Konoha echoed in his mind, urging him to follow the path of peace, to protect the village, to be a hero. Yet, deep within him, another part whispered a different truth, a truth that Shisui had never truly embraced. A truth that resonated with the isolation and pain Naruto had always felt. The villagers didn't love him, didn't trust him. He had given his heart to Konoha, only to have it trampled. But now, with the Sharingan, he had the power to change that, to reshape the village according to his own will. The idea of breaking free from the constraints of his past, of casting aside the village's expectations, was almost too appealing to resist. Naruto closed his eyes, the world around him fading away as he focused on the deep well of chakra that had always pulsed beneath his skin. The power of the Uchiha, amplified by the memories of Shisui's strength, filled him, pushing against the walls of his control. The images of Shisui's sacrifice, the selflessness, the unwavering loyalty to Konoha flickered in his mind, but they felt distant, faded by the growing desire to assert his own dominance. He opened his eyes and let the Sharingan manifest. The crimson glow felt different tonight. The usual three tomo spiraled within his eyes, but something more powerful stirred beneath the surface. It was as if the very essence of Shisui's will was coursing through him, shaping his thoughts and desires. But it was no longer just Shisui's will. It was his own now, a twisted reflection of the pain and betrayal he had suffered. Naruto's gaze hardened. He was ready to push further. Slowly, he stood and walked to the center of the room, where a small mirror rested on the floor. The reflection staring back at him was not the innocent, hopeful boy who had once dreamed of being Hokage. It was something darker, something that knew the weight of the power it held. He felt it in the way his chakras swirled around him, an invisible force that crackled with dangerous potential. Taking a deep breath, Naruto began to focus, channeling the full extent of his chakra into his eyes. He wanted to see how far he could push the Sharingan, to test the limits of its influence. He had read about the genjutsu techniques, the illusions that could manipulate the mind, but tonight he was not interested in simple tricks. Tonight, he would experiment with the most dangerous power of all, the Kotoamatsukami. The technique, Shisui's most powerful ability, had been a gift, a way to influence and control others without them ever realizing it. To alter a person's will, to reshape their memories, to make them do anything you desired, all without them even knowing. Naruto had heard of it, understood its potential, but had never dared to use it before. Now, with the full force of Shisui's memories flooding him, he felt the pull to try. He focused on the image of an elder in the village, someone who had long regarded Naruto with disdain. The elder was known for his harsh words and dismissive attitude, a man who had contributed to the isolation Naruto had felt growing up. In his mind's eye, Naruto saw the elder's face clearly. The man was old, his features hard and unyielding, much like the village that had rejected him. Naruto's Sharingan spun faster, the crimson glow intensifying. His mind reached out, not with physical force but with a subtle pull, a whisper to the elder's subconscious. He could feel the presence of the man's thoughts, his memories, his deepest convictions. All of it laid bare before him. And with a surge of power, Naruto began to twist the man's reality. "You will stop hating me," Naruto thought, his voice silent but powerful within his mind. "You will treat me with respect. You will acknowledge my worth." It was an experiment, nothing more. But as Naruto poured more of his chakra into the technique, something unexpected happened. The elder's eyes widened, and for a brief moment, his expression flickered with confusion. The air in the room grew heavy, charged with an unseen force. And then Naruto felt it. A rush of cold energy, a sharp, sudden clarity. The technique had activated. The elder's features softened. His eyes lost their sharpness, replaced by a blank, peaceful expression. Slowly, as if in a trance, the old man nodded and muttered something about respect, about the importance of recognizing Naruto's value. He spoke with a tone of newfound admiration, but there was no awareness of the shift. It was as if the elder had always felt this way. Naruto stepped back, his heart pounding in his chest. He hadn't intended to use the Kotoamatsukami, not yet, not like this. But the power had surged out of him, uncontrollable, unstoppable. He had bent the elder's will to his own without effort, without even meaning to. A wave of exhilaration washed over him, followed by a sickening realization. He had done it. He had altered someone's mind. And in that moment, he understood the true potential of his abilities. He could control anyone. Anyone at all. Konoha, the village that had scorned him, he could bend it to his will. He could become the ruler of this place, the master of all its people. But the weight of the realization hit him like a punch to the gut. Power like this came with consequences. He could manipulate the minds of his friends, his teachers, the villagers, and even the Hokage himself. There would be no limit to what he could do. He could reshape Konoha in his image, make it bow to him, and no one would ever resist. But as the excitement waned, fear began to creep in. He could sense the darkness that this power brought with it. It was intoxicating, seductive, but dangerous. Naruto's chest tightened as the implications of his actions settled in. The line between using his power to protect himself and using it to control others was thin, too thin. Shisui's memories echoed in his mind again, his sacrifice, his ideals, his desire for peace. "You are meant for greater things," the ghost of Shisui's voice seemed to whisper. "Don't lose yourself to this power. Don't become what they feared." Naruto clenched his fists, feeling the weight of those words, but they were no longer enough to quell the storm inside him. The temptation to wield the power for his own gain was too strong. The next morning, Naruto found himself standing in the academy courtyard, his heart racing with the uncertainty of the night before. He tried to act normal, to carry on as if nothing had changed, but the presence of his newfound power loomed over him like a shadow. Sasuke approached him, his eyes sharp as usual. But there was something different in the air between them now, something unspoken. Sasuke had always been a reminder of the Uchiha legacy, but now Naruto could feel the weight of that legacy pressing down on him. He wondered, for a fleeting moment, if Sasuke could sense it too, the change within him, the hunger for more. "You've been acting strange," Sasuke remarked, his voice low. "Something's different." Naruto met his gaze, his heart thumping in his chest. Sasuke's words, his scrutiny, felt heavier than before. "You don't know anything," Naruto muttered, almost to himself. "But I'm starting to." Sasuke didn't press him further. He simply turned, walking away without another word. But Naruto could feel the weight of his gaze lingering, the suspicion in his eyes. The temptation to embrace his power, to let it consume him, had never been more enticing. But as Naruto stood there, watching Sasuke's retreating form, he knew one thing for sure. There was no turning back now. Naruto stood at the edge of the village gate, looking out over the vast expanse of the land beyond. His mission today seemed simple enough, a reconnaissance task in a small, border village on the outskirts of the Land of Fire. He had done such missions countless times before, but today felt different. His heart, though steady on the surface, thudded harder in his chest, as if it too sensed the growing storm inside him. Sasuke and Sakura stood nearby, preparing for the mission in silence. Sakura fidgeted with her gear, her brow furrowed in concentration. Sasuke, ever composed, glanced briefly at Naruto before focusing on the map in his hands. Despite the mundane nature of the mission, Naruto could feel the tension between them. Sasuke had been acting more distant lately, his eyes heavy with suspicion, as if he had noticed something about Naruto that he himself hadn't yet figured out. Naruto swallowed. The fear of being discovered had been gnawing at him for weeks now. It wasn't just his power, it was the feeling that it was slipping beyond his control. His Sharingan, his ability to manipulate minds, his newfound speed and strength, all of it was growing faster than he could comprehend. It was as if his very being was changing, shifting into something far more dangerous than the village had ever prepared for. And the worst part was that he was becoming more and more comfortable with it. "Ready to go." Sakura's voice broke his thoughts, but Naruto barely registered it. He forced a smile, trying to push down the dread that was rising in his chest. "Yeah, let's get this over with," Naruto replied, his voice steadier than he felt. Sasuke glanced at him again, his eyes narrowing ever so slightly, but he didn't speak. The three of them set off, making their way through the village gates and into the forest beyond. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows through the trees as they traveled deeper into the wilderness. Naruto could feel the power simmering beneath his skin, the ever-present pull of the Sharingan that constantly threatened to break free. He could hear the voices in his head, whispers of Shisui, of his legacy. They urged him toward a path of restraint, of duty, but there was something else too, a growing hunger. His control over the Sharingan was stronger than ever, but the power he had within him was beginning to push against the limits he had set. It was then that they found the rogue ninja. The man came out of nowhere, an assassin with lightning-fast reflexes, moving like a shadow in the trees. He attacked without warning, a flurry of kunao and shuriken raining down on them. Sasuke reacted instantly, his Sharingan flashing as he dodged and countered with deadly precision. Sakura, her medical ninja skills still in their infancy, took cover behind a tree, her eyes wide with fear. Naruto moved without thinking, his body instinctively flowing into the battle. The rogue ninja was fast, but Naruto was faster. He had trained, he had pushed himself beyond his limits, and now he moved with an ease he had never known before. His speed, enhanced by the Sharingan, allowed him to anticipate every move before it happened, every strike before it landed. But then, something happened. As the rogue ninja aimed for Sasuke, Naruto's Sharingan flared to life. His vision blurred with crimson as his control slipped, and in that instant, something deep within him took over. The rogue's eyes met his, and before he even realized what was happening, Naruto's will had seized control of the man's mind. The world around him seemed to slow, as if time itself had bent to his will. The rogue ninja's body froze in mid-motion, his muscles locked in place as Naruto's genjutsu took hold. In his mind, Naruto saw everything the rogue's past, his motivations, his fears. He could taste his anger, feel his desperation. But more than that, he could manipulate it. The rogue's will became a tool, a weapon in his hands. "Stop fighting," Naruto commanded silently. "You are no longer my enemy. Your fight is over." The rogue ninja's eyes glazed over, and slowly, his body dropped to its knees, the fight draining out of him. Sasuke and Sakura stood frozen, wide-eyed, watching in stunned silence. Naruto's breathing quickened, but his eyes remained focused on the now subdued rogue. He felt powerful, invincible. But that feeling quickly soured. The rogue ninja's body shook, his hands gripping the ground as if trying to resist, trying to fight the force that was now controlling him. Naruto's mind screamed at him to let go, to stop. But it was too late. The power surged within him, making his vision blur, the line between control and chaos thinning with every passing second. He could feel Shisui's memories pushing against his mind, urging him to stop, to release the man. Naruto fought it. He had to. This was what he wanted, wasn't it? Power. Control. The ability to change things. To shape the world in his image. But the flood of emotions, Shisui's feelings of duty, of sacrifice, of the weight of his choices overwhelmed him. A vision surged through his mind, too intense to ignore. He saw Shisui, standing alone on a rooftop, his eyes filled with a mixture of resolve and sorrow. The face of Itachi, distant and full of regret, flickered in the background. The memories rushed in like a torrent. Shisui's love for Konoha, his deep belief in its future, his final sacrifice. Naruto gasped, his body trembling as the memory surged through him. The vision of Shisui became clearer. He saw the moment Shisui had given his life, the tragic decision to protect Konoha from its darkest impulses. "This is not who you are," Shisui's voice whispered in his mind. "You cannot let this power define you." Naruto's hands shook, his Sharingan spinning uncontrollably. He could feel the rogue ninja's mind slipping away, his will teetering on the edge of total manipulation. But Naruto didn't want to be like Shisui. He didn't want to carry that weight, that responsibility. Yet, in the face of such overwhelming power, Naruto's heart was torn in two. The strength, the control, it was so easy to give into it. But the consequences were something he could not ignore. "Naruto." Sasuke's voice broke through the chaos, and Naruto turned to face him, his heart pounding in his chest. Sasuke's eyes were narrow, suspicious. There was a sharpness to them that hadn't been there before, a coldness that set Naruto on edge. What did you just do?" Sasuke demanded, his voice low and steady. Naruto's gaze shifted to the rogue ninja, still kneeling before him, his expression blank. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," Naruto muttered, his voice unsteady. Sasuke's eyes narrowed further. "Your powers, they're getting out of control." There was something else in his gaze now, something darker, something Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to face. I can control them," Naruto said quickly, trying to steady his voice. He turned to the rogue, releasing him from the genjutsu. The man collapsed to the ground, his body limp, his eyes vacant. "I can control it," Naruto repeated, more to himself than to Sasuke. But Sasuke wasn't convinced. He stepped closer, his eyes intense. You don't even know the extent of what you're capable of, do you? He spoke with a cold bitterness that stung. You're not the only one with power. Don't think you can just. Sasuke's words were cut off as the rogue ninja began to stir, groaning softly. Sakura rushed over to him, checking for signs of life. Naruto's mind was reeling, his body trembling with the weight of the decision he had just made. Sasuke was right. His powers were spiraling out of control, and he didn't know how to stop it. The weight of Shisui's memories pressed on him once more, the sacrifice, the ideals. Could he really carry such a burden? Could he live up to the expectations of someone like Shisui? The truth was that Naruto didn't know anymore. The battle for control wasn't just with the rogue ninja, it was with himself. The three of them finished the mission, but the tension between them lingered, unspoken but undeniable. Naruto knew that Sasuke was watching him now, more closely than ever. And he could feel it, the growing divide between him and his old teammates. The line between power and corruption was thinner than ever, and the question that lingered in his mind was one he didn't have an answer to. What would happen when the line was crossed? The weight of his thoughts pressed down on Naruto as he walked through the narrow corridors of the Hokage library. The walls around him, filled with old scrolls and books, held the history of the entire village, a history he was beginning to see through a new lens. He had spent hours researching the Uchiha clan's history, every scrap of information he could find on Shisui, and the events that led to the downfall of the once proud clan. The deeper he dug, the more unsettling the truths became. Shisui's tragic fate had been something Naruto had known in passing, an act of self-sacrifice to protect Konoha, a tragic death in the name of duty. But what Naruto hadn't known was the full scope of the manipulation and betrayal that had come before Shisui's end. The Uchiha clan, with its rich legacy of power and pride, had been crushed beneath the weight of Konoha's mistrust and fear. The Sharingan, once a symbol of the Uchiha strength, had become a tool of oppression. Konoha's leadership, including the Hokage, had turned against them, fearing their power and plotting to eliminate them before they could become a threat. Naruto paused at a dusty scroll detailing the history of the Uchiha clan. It was marked with a faint red seal, a symbol of restricted knowledge. He had to push the scroll open with some effort, its brittle pages threatening to tear with the slightest touch. The words he read made his stomach churn. The truth of the massacre. The truth of the Akatsuki's role in the clan's destruction. It was far darker than Naruto had anticipated. It wasn't just the betrayal of the village, it was the village's deep-seated conspiracy to destroy the Uchiha, to erase them from Konoha's history altogether. The actions of certain high-ranking officials, including the Hokage, had been a desperate attempt to prevent the rise of a power that could threaten the established order. The clan had been targeted, manipulated, and eventually destroyed from within. And Shisui, the man whose memories now haunted Naruto's dreams, had been caught in the middle of it all. His attempt to protect Konoha from within, to prevent the impending war, had led to his tragic death. The ultimate sacrifice. But now, Naruto realized, there was another layer to Shisui's story, something deeper, more personal. Shisui had been used, just like the Uchiha. He had been forced into a position where he had to choose between loyalty to Konoha and loyalty to his own bloodline. And in the end, he had sacrificed himself for the village, all while carrying the weight of the Uchiha curse. Naruto ran his fingers along the ancient scrolls, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what he was reading. There was a part of him that felt a deep connection to Shisui, this man who had lived and died with the same sense of duty that Naruto had once embraced. But now, as he learned more about Shisui's past, Naruto felt conflicted. Could he really follow in Shisui's footsteps, bearing the weight of that sacrifice, or was it time for him to break away, to reject the ideals of loyalty and duty that had led so many before him to their deaths? But there was one thing that stood out to him, a truth he couldn't ignore. The Kotoamatsukami. Shisui had used this power, the ability to control the minds of others, in a desperate attempt to protect the village, to prevent the bloodshed that was inevitable. But now, Naruto realized, the very power that had once been used for the greater good was now in his hands. He could control the minds of others. He could make them do his bidding. And he wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a curse. The thought of wielding such power filled him with both excitement and fear. The temptation to use the Kotoamatsukami to reshape the world according to his own will was overwhelming. He could make people bow to him, force them to see the world the way he saw it. But was that the right path? Was he, too, just another pawn in a long line of sacrifices? The weight of his own power pressed down on him. He could hear Shisui's voice in his mind once more, urging him to find his own path, to embrace the ideals of duty and self-sacrifice. But the more he thought about it, the more uncertain he became. Was it worth it? Was it worth following a path that led to endless suffering and death? Naruto was so lost in his thoughts that he didn't hear Sasuke approach. The sound of footsteps interrupted his reverie, and Naruto turned to see his old friend standing in the doorway of the library. "Sasuke," Naruto said quietly, his voice heavy with the weight of the thoughts racing through his mind. "What are you doing here?" Sasuke glanced at the open scrolls before looking Naruto in the eye. His expression was unreadable, but there was something in his gaze that spoke volumes: curiosity, suspicion, but perhaps something else too. Something darker. "I could ask you the same thing," Sasuke replied, his voice low. "You've been here for hours. Searching for answers." Naruto felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Sasuke had always been perceptive, always aware when something was wrong. He hadn't been able to hide his inner turmoil from his friend, not when the burden of the Sharingan weighed so heavily on him. Naruto hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I've been looking into the Uchiha clan." "Shisui," he trailed off, unsure of how to explain the feelings swirling within him. "I don't know what to think anymore. All these truths, the lies Konoha had told us, the history we were never taught." Sasuke's eyes narrowed slightly, his posture stiffening. "You think that's what's bothering you?" His voice was tinged with something bitter, something Naruto couldn't quite place. "The Uchiha legacy? The lies?" Naruto nodded, his gaze falling to the scroll in his hands. "It's not just the history. It's Shisui. His sacrifice. All he did for the village, for Konoha. But in the end, he died for nothing. They all died for nothing." A tense silence fell between them. Sasuke studied Naruto for a moment before speaking again, his voice softer this time. "You're not the only one who has carried the weight of the Uchiha legacy," Sasuke said, his tone heavier than usual. "I've been through it. I've walked that path. The betrayal, the manipulation, the bloodshed. I know it all." Naruto felt a pang of guilt. He had always known that Sasuke's life had been shaped by the same forces that had torn apart the Uchiha clan. But hearing Sasuke speak about it with such raw emotion made Naruto realize just how much pain his friend had endured. "Then what do we do?" Naruto asked, his voice barely a whisper. "What path do we take? Can we ever truly escape the past, or are we doomed to repeat it?" Sasuke looked at Naruto for a long moment, his gaze unreadable. "You need to decide for yourself," he finally said, his voice steady. "You're carrying Shisui's legacy, just like I'm carrying mine. But that doesn't mean we have to follow the same path. You have the power to choose. Will you continue down this road of self-sacrifice, or will you embrace the power you have and carve your own path?" Naruto looked down at the scroll in his hands, the weight of Sasuke's words settling deep within him. The Kotoamatsukami, the power to control others, he could use it to create a new world, a world shaped by his own desires. But would that make him any different from the very people who had betrayed the Uchiha? Was power enough to justify the destruction of everything he had once believed in? "I don't know," Naruto said, his voice filled with uncertainty. I don't know if I can carry this weight. I don't know if I can follow Shisui's path. Sasuke gave a small, almost imperceptible shrug. Then you'll have to decide. You'll have to decide what kind of legacy you want to leave behind. Naruto looked up at Sasuke, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a deep sense of understanding between them. Sasuke, too, had been forced to confront his past, to face the darkness that came with the Uchiha bloodline. But unlike Naruto, Sasuke had already made his choice. He had already walked the path of vengeance, of power. And now, Naruto had to decide if he would walk a similar path or choose something entirely different. For the first time in his life, Naruto realized that the future was entirely in his hands. But what he did with that power, whether he embraced it or rejected it, was something only he could decide. Naruto stood in the middle of the training ground, the sunlight filtering through the canopy of trees above. The air was thick with the scent of fresh grass and the faint hum of insects. He had always loved the solitude of the training fields, away from the prying eyes of the village, away from the pressure of being the demon child. Here, in this space, he could be himself. Or, at least, he used to be able to. But today, there was something different. Something had shifted within him. The weight of the power that had been growing inside him over the past few weeks had become undeniable. It was not just his mastery over the Sharingan or his increasing control over chakra, it was something darker, something deeper. The power of Kotoamatsukami, the ability to control the minds of others, was a constant presence in the back of his mind. He could feel it, like a beast that had awoken inside of him, waiting to be unleashed. It was tempting. The allure of the Kotoamatsukami was strong, too strong to ignore. He could use it to make the village see him for who he truly was, to force them to accept him. He could manipulate them all, make them bow to his will. They would no longer look at him with fear or disdain, they would respect him. They would love him. But that thought left a bitter taste in his mouth. Respect through manipulation? Was that truly what he wanted? Was he willing to strip people of their autonomy, their will, just to make them love him? The answer was clear, no. But that didn't make the temptation go away. Naruto clenched his fists, trying to shake the thoughts from his mind. He had to focus. This training was supposed to be a chance to push his limits, to grow stronger, not to let his mind wander into dangerous territory. Focus, he muttered to himself. He was about to begin a series of taijutsu drills when a voice interrupted him. Hey, do you mind? You're in my way. Naruto turned to see one of his academy peers, a boy named Kaido, standing a few meters away with his arms crossed. Kaido was a brash, arrogant kid who had always looked down on Naruto. He wasn't particularly strong, but he had a knack for getting under Naruto's skin. What do you want, Kaido? Naruto asked, trying to keep his voice even. His fists were still clenched, the temptation bubbling just beneath the surface. Move. I need to practice too, you know, Kaido said, his voice dripping with condescension. Or do you think you own this place just because you're the Hokage's son? Naruto's breath caught in his throat. The words hit harder than he expected. What did you say? He asked, his voice low, dangerous. Kaido didn't seem to notice the change in Naruto's tone. He took a step forward, poking Naruto's chest with a finger. I said, you don't own this place. You're just a freak with an overinflated sense of self-importance. Maybe if you weren't so busy trying to be a hero, you could actually be useful. Naruto's body tensed. He could feel the heat rising in his chest, his vision narrowing. The anger, the frustration, the resentment, everything he had been holding in for years, it all swelled up inside him. His fingers twitched involuntarily, and before he knew it, his Sharingan activated. Kaido froze. Naruto's heart skipped a beat. He hadn't meant to do it. He didn't even know he had activated the Sharingan. But now, Kaido's eyes were glazed over, and his posture had slackened. Naruto could feel the pulse of the genjutsu taking effect. He had used it instinctively. It was as if his power had a mind of its own, a mind that knew exactly what it wanted. The feeling was intoxicating. For a moment, Naruto watched, transfixed, as Kaido's movements became robotic, his expression vacant. It was as though Naruto had rewritten the boy's very will. He could make Kaido do anything at all. The thought raced through his mind like wildfire. Naruto's breath quickened, and a dark thrill ran through him. This was it. The power to reshape the world, to command others, to force them to bend to his desires. It was within his reach. "Move," Naruto whispered, his voice cold. "Get out of my way." Kaido didn't hesitate. Without a single word, he stepped aside, his body obeying the command without question. Naruto stood there, frozen in place, his heart pounding in his chest. What had he just done? He had taken control of another person's will. He had manipulated them like a puppet. The exhilaration of power surged through him, but it was quickly followed by a wave of dread. Was this what he had become? A master of control, willing to erase the very essence of someone's being for his own convenience. The weight of that realization hit him hard. Kaido, now free from the genjutsu, looked at him with confusion. What just happened? I don't remember. Naruto didn't answer. He simply turned away, his mind reeling. He had crossed a line. He had done something that couldn't be undone. The thought of using this power again to force people to do his bidding, to manipulate them as easily as he had Kaido, was like a drug. But what would it cost him? What kind of person would he become if he gave in to the temptation? The darkness was always there, lurking beneath the surface, whispering to him, urging him to embrace it. And the more Naruto thought about it, the more the temptation gnawed at him. Could he truly change the world by force? Was that the only way to get what he wanted? Could he reshape Konoha into a place where he wasn't an outcast, where he wasn't seen as the son of a demon? Naruto's mind was spinning. He needed answers, but he wasn't sure if he even wanted to hear them. He walked away from Kaido, his steps slow and heavy, each one carrying the weight of the decision he had just made. As he left the training grounds, Naruto's thoughts turned inward. He could still hear Shisui's voice echoing in his mind, urging him to stay true to the path of loyalty and sacrifice, to protect the village no matter the cost. But the more he struggled with his growing power, the more he realized that Shisui's ideals were slowly becoming a distant memory, replaced by the promise of something darker. Could he really be like Shisui? Could he truly follow the path of selflessness and duty, or was the path of darkness his only true option? The question gnawed at him, eating away at his resolve. The darkness was tempting. It called to him with its promises of power, of control, of respect. But deep down, Naruto knew that the more he succumbed to it, the more he would lose himself. His identity, his purpose, his humanity, all of it was at risk. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know which path to take. But one thing was certain, the darkness was already inside of him. And it was waiting for the moment he would allow it to take over completely. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the smell of salt and the distant crash of waves against the jagged cliffs of the land of waves. Naruto stood at the edge of the small village, looking out over the sea, his hands buried deep in the pockets of his cloak. He had always been a wanderer at heart, his thoughts constantly drifting like the waves crashing below him. Yet, lately, his thoughts felt heavier, burdened by the growing sense of isolation. It wasn't the same as before, when he had been the lonely boy with no friends, no place in the world. Now, it felt different. He had friends Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, but with every passing day, those bonds seemed to fray, to unravel. Every time he looked at them, he saw the distance between them growing wider, an invisible gulf that he couldn't cross, no matter how hard he tried. He had been using his Sharingan more often lately, unable to stop himself. The power it offered, the ability to see through lies, to control the minds of others, to manipulate reality, it was intoxicating. It was so easy to slip into that world, to let the power of the Uchiha bloodline guide him. The more he used it, the more he felt the pull of his new identity, a person both familiar and foreign to him. Naruto, Sasuke's voice cut through his thoughts. We've got work to do. Naruto turned, meeting Sasuke's eyes. The younger Uchiha looked at him with an intensity that Naruto had come to recognize, a look that seemed to burn with suspicion, and something else, something darker. Right, Naruto muttered, his voice hollow. The mission they were on was supposed to be simple: track down a group of rogue ninjas who had been terrorizing the village. But as they made their way through the dense forest, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that this mission, like everything else lately, would only push him further away from his teammates. Sasuke was the first to sense the danger, his Sharingan activated and scanning the surroundings. The rogue ninjas were skilled, but they were no match for the team. They had fought together countless times before, and though their tactics had changed over the years, they had become a well-oiled machine. Sasuke leading the charge, Sakura providing support, and Naruto? Naruto didn't need to wait for orders. As the rogue ninjas appeared, he was already in motion, his feet blurring as he moved with speed that seemed impossible. His Sharingan flared, and the world around him slowed, as if he could see every movement, every subtle twitch of his enemy's muscles. His hands moved without thinking, each strike landing with perfect precision, each movement calculated. The rogue ninjas fell before him in seconds, their bodies limp, their wills shattered under the pressure of his genjutsu. When the fight was over, the clearing was eerily quiet. Naruto stood in the center, his chest heaving, his body pulsing with adrenaline. His teammates were there, too: Sasuke, Sakura, Kakashi, but their expressions were distant. Sasuke was the first to speak. His eyes were cold, his lips pressed into a tight line. That was too easy, Naruto. You've been getting too powerful. Are you trying to show off? Naruto frowned, his breath still ragged. What are you talking about? We won, didn't we? It's not that, Sasuke said, his tone flat. It's the way you fought. Your strength, it's too much. What? You're jealous? Naruto snapped, but the words felt hollow, as if they weren't meant for Sasuke, but for something deeper, something inside him that he didn't know how to control. Sasuke's eyes narrowed, his gaze sharp. Jealous? You think this is about jealousy? He took a step forward, his fists clenched at his sides. I'm worried about you, Naruto. You're changing. I don't recognize you anymore. Naruto's heart sank. The words cut deeper than any physical blow could have. He had felt it, the distance between them, the way Sasuke was pulling away, the way he was looking at him like a stranger. But to hear Sasuke say it aloud, it made everything feel real. Sakura stepped forward then, her eyes full of concern. Naruto, maybe Sasuke's right. You've been pushing yourself too hard. This power, it's dangerous. We're supposed to be a team, remember? Naruto's hands curled into fists at his sides. I don't need anyone's help, he shouted, his voice sharp, the words carrying an edge of anger he hadn't expected. I've always been alone, so what difference does it make if I'm stronger than all of you? What difference does it make if I use this power? There was a heavy silence. Sasuke and Sakura exchanged a glance, but neither of them spoke. It was like a wall had gone up between them, and Naruto was on the other side, shouting into the void, but no one was listening. Naruto turned away, walking off into the trees, not caring that his teammates were left behind. His mind was a whirlpool of emotions: anger, frustration, confusion. He didn't want this power, but at the same time, it was all he had. It was the only thing that kept him from disappearing into nothingness. He could hear the voices in his head again, the whispers of the Uchiha bloodline, urging him to embrace his strength, to use it to reshape the world. He could feel the pull of Kotoamatsukami, the seductive power that promised him control, that promised him the respect he had always craved. But at the same time, he could hear the voices of his friend Sasuke's suspicion, Sakura's concern, and they made him question everything. He was torn, pulled in two directions, each one promising something different, something dangerous. That night, after the mission was over, Naruto found himself staring at the moon, his mind swirling with thoughts. He had come so far, but now it felt like he was losing everything that mattered. His friends, the bonds he had fought so hard to build, they were slipping away, and no matter how much he tried to hold onto them, they were like sand slipping through his fingers. He had always known that he was different, that he was marked by something darker than most. But now, the darkness was more than just a mark, it was a part of him, a part he couldn't escape. He had to wonder, was this who he was meant to be? Was the Uchiha bloodline, with all its power and its curses, the path he was destined to walk? The next morning, the team set out again, the tension between them thick and palpable. Sasuke's eyes followed Naruto warily, his gaze never leaving him for long. Sakura's concern was evident, but she didn't know how to help him. And Naruto? He kept his gaze forward, his mind locked in a struggle he couldn't share with anyone. As the days passed, the fissure between them only grew wider. The distance between Naruto and his teammates became an unbridgeable chasm, one that Naruto wasn't sure he wanted to cross anymore. He had always fought for acceptance, for recognition, but now he wasn't sure if he even cared about that anymore. All he knew was that he was alone, and the darkness inside him was growing stronger with every passing moment. Sasuke's suspicion burned like a fire, and Naruto could feel the weight of his gaze, the silent judgment that followed him everywhere he went. It was like a rope pulling him away from the only people he had ever cared about. But in the back of his mind, there was a voice that whispered to him, urging him to embrace the power he had inherited, urging him to forget about everyone else. It promised him control, promised him the respect he had always craved, and that voice was becoming harder and harder to ignore. Naruto was caught in a battle, not just for control over his powers, but for control over himself. The path he was walking was dark, and he wasn't sure if he could find his way back to the light. The fissure between him and his friends was widening, and he couldn't tell if it was something he could repair, or if it was something that had been broken beyond saving. The village of Konoha was alive with the hum of daily life, yet to Naruto, it felt like a distant echo. The streets that once felt like home now seemed foreign, the faces of the villagers blurred in his mind. He stood at the village's edge, staring out into the vast wilderness beyond, a place that once represented fear and uncertainty. But now, it felt like freedom from the chains of the past, from the expectations of the village, from the ideals that had once defined him. Naruto's transformation had been swift. The power he had gained from the Uchiha bloodline, the Sharingan, and the remnants of Shisui's memories, those thoughts, that sense of duty to Konoha had been with him ever since. But now, they were starting to feel like shackles, restraining him from embracing the power that was truly his own. The blood of the Uchiha coursed through his veins, but the life it promised, the ideals it demanded, he was beginning to resent them. He had always believed that he was different, that he could break away from the expectations placed upon him. But now, as his strength grew, the more he realized how much of his life had been a construct, built by others. Konoha, his parents' legacy, the Hokage's ideals, they were all part of a web that had confined him, told him who he should be, what he should do. But he wasn't a tool, a pawn in some grand scheme. He wasn't meant to follow in the footsteps of men who had come before him. His mind kept returning to Shisui's teachings. The memories of the Uchiha who had tried to stop the madness of his clan, the man who had been a symbol of peace and sacrifice. Part of Naruto still clung to Shisui's ideals, the desire to protect, to preserve Konoha, to make the world a better place. But that voice inside him, the one that whispered of power and the ability to control everything, was louder now. It urged him to take control, to reshape the world, to create a new reality where he was the one in charge. Naruto felt torn, as if his soul were caught in a violent storm, pulled in two directions. On one side, there was the pull of his past, the village, his friends, the ideals he had once sworn to uphold. On the other, there was the allure of power, the temptation to be free, to no longer be shackled by the expectations of others. His thoughts were interrupted by a familiar presence. Sasuke. He could feel his former friend's approach, the familiar chakra's signature growing stronger as Sasuke drew near. "You're still here?" Sasuke's voice cut through the silence, his tone flat, his eyes narrowed in suspicion. The Uchiha's expression was cold, but there was something more, a deep sense of concern, perhaps even fear. Naruto didn't turn to face him immediately. He could feel Sasuke's gaze, could feel the tension in the air between them. "What do you want, Sasuke?" Naruto's voice was low, distant. He didn't want to face this, not now, not with the weight of his decision hanging over him. "I've been watching you," Sasuke said, his words measured, calm, but there was an edge to his voice. "You've changed, Naruto. And I don't think it's for the better." Naruto finally turned to face him, his eyes locking with Sasuke's. The distance between them had always been there, but now it felt insurmountable, like an abyss that neither of them could cross. "I'm not the same person I was," Naruto admitted, his voice tinged with regret. "But I don't think I was ever meant to be. The village, this place, it's all built on a lie." Sasuke's eyes darkened. "A lie? What the hell are you talking about? We've both been through hell to protect this place. And now you want to throw it all away?" Naruto's hands clenched into fists at his sides. He could feel the surge of power within him, the strength of the Sharingan calling out to him, urging him to use it. "Protect this place?" Naruto's laugh was bitter, empty. "What about me, Sasuke? What about my life? I've spent all these years trying to prove myself, trying to earn the village's respect, trying to be a part of something. But I've never been anything more than a weapon, a tool. A pawn in their game." Sasuke's expression shifted, his eyes narrowing with understanding. "Is that what this is about? You think Konoha's been holding you back?" Naruto turned away, looking out over the village once again. "They've been controlling me, Sasuke. From the moment I was born, they made me a symbol, a tool to protect their precious village. But I've realized something: there's more to life than this. More to power, more to my own existence." "You're wrong," Sasuke shot back, stepping forward, his voice rising. "You're being manipulated by your power, by the same things that have corrupted the Uchiha clan. You think you're above all of that, but you're just like them. You're becoming a tool for the village, a weapon for their control." Naruto's heart pounded in his chest. Sasuke's words struck deep, but he wasn't about to back down. "No. I'm not like them. I'm not like you either. I'm going to carve my own path, Sasuke. And if that means leaving Konoha behind, so be it." Sasuke's eyes widened, his face hardening. "Leaving Konoha? You really think you can just walk away from everything? From us? You're turning your back on everything we've fought for. Everything we've sacrificed." Naruto met Sasuke's gaze, his voice firm, unyielding. "I'm not turning my back. I'm finally choosing for myself. I'm not going to be a puppet anymore, Sasuke. I'm going to make my own destiny." The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. Sasuke stood there, his fists clenched, his gaze searching Naruto's face, as if trying to find some trace of the boy he had once called a friend. But there was nothing left. Naruto had changed. The boy who had once sought acceptance, who had longed to be loved and acknowledged, was gone. In his place stood a man who had embraced his power, who had learned the truth of the world around him, and who was ready to shape it in his own image. "I won't stop you," Sasuke said finally, his voice cold. "But don't expect me to follow you. Not like this." Naruto's chest tightened, a pang of sorrow settling deep within him. "I don't want you to follow me, Sasuke. I don't want anyone to follow me. I'm done living for others. I'm going to live for myself." With that, Naruto turned his back on Sasuke and Konoha, leaving the only life he had ever known behind. As he walked away, he could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on him, but at the same time, he felt a sense of freedom, a sense that for the first time in his life, he was truly in control of his own fate. The road ahead was uncertain. The path he had chosen was dangerous, filled with darkness and conflict. But it was his path, and no one could tell him how to walk it anymore. The bonds he had once held dear were now broken, and Naruto knew that there was no going back. He was no longer a symbol of hope for the village. No longer a hero. He was something else now, something darker, something more powerful. And as he walked into the unknown, he couldn't help but wonder if he was destined to become the very thing he had once fought against. But one thing was certain, Naruto Uzumaki would never be controlled again. The wind swept across the open fields of the Land of Fire, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and pine. For Naruto, this was the beginning of his new life. A life without the constraints of Konoha, without the expectations of his past, and without the weight of the bonds he had severed. The once bright village that had raised him now felt like a distant memory, a place he had left behind in search of something more, something that could give him the freedom he longed for. Naruto had become a rogue, a name whispered in the shadows, feared by those who had once considered him an ally. His power was undeniable. The Sharingan, once a tool of control and manipulation, had become an extension of his will. And with each passing day, he felt it grow stronger. The eyes that once served as a symbol of his burden now felt like a key to unlocking his true potential. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, Naruto felt truly alive. He had crossed into the wilderness, far from the safety of Konoha's walls, and there, he became a legend. A bounty had been placed on his head by the very village that had raised him, and those who sought wealth and glory made their attempts to claim it. Bandits, mercenaries, and bounty hunters all thought they could take down the rogue shinobi. They were wrong. Naruto had become a blur in the wilderness, his chakra spreading like a storm across the land, rippling through the trees and the very ground beneath his feet. The first few encounters had been easy. He had dispatched the lowly mercenaries and bounty hunters without so much as a second thought. His control over the Sharingan had grown to an almost terrifying degree, and his ability to manipulate the mind had left his enemies writhing in hopelessness. But even the strongest of wolves could not avoid the pack forever. And soon, Naruto found himself facing something more than mere bounty hunters. It was in a small, desolate village nestled deep in the Land of Fire when he encountered the one person he had least expected, a former Konoha shinobi, a member of the Umbu Black Ops. The shinobi stood at the edge of the village, his posture rigid, his eyes scanning the horizon. His presence was unmistakable, his chakra a silent whisper that told Naruto all he needed to know. This was no ordinary man. He had once been a part of the very organization Naruto had left behind, a brother in arms who now stood as an enemy. "You've become quite the legend, Naruto," the Umbu member spoke, his voice smooth but laced with a sense of quiet authority. He wore the traditional mask of the Black Ops, a design Naruto didn't recognize, but his eyes Naruto could see the pain and regret there. "Konoha wants you back. There's still time for you to come home." Naruto's gaze hardened as he turned to face the shinobi. He had not expected a confrontation like this, not so soon. "Home." Naruto's voice was a low growl, carrying with it the bitterness of betrayal. "Konoha is not my home anymore. You should know that better than anyone." The Umbu's eyes flickered with something regret, perhaps, or guilt. Naruto, you don't understand. The village needs you. Your power, your potential Konoha needs a leader, someone who can protect it. You've always been the one chosen for that. You're not a rogue. You're not an enemy. Naruto's fists clenched. His mind raced, and his chakra flared. The memories of Konoha, the mission, the betrayal, the isolation flooded his mind like a torrent. His body trembled with the weight of it all. He had been the village's weapon, a tool to be used and discarded when it no longer suited them. The pain, the anger, it was all too much. I don't need Konoha, Naruto spat, his eyes glowing crimson. I've learned everything I need to know. They never cared about me. All I've ever been is a weapon to them. The Umbu's gaze faltered. You're wrong, Naruto. There are those who care about you. You're not alone. Please, come back. We can fix this. Naruto's eyes flickered with something dangerous as he activated his Sharingan. The world around him seemed to slow, and his senses sharpened. The Umbu member was skilled, no doubt about that, but his experience didn't compare to Naruto's. His mind had evolved in ways the man couldn't comprehend. No. You don't understand. Naruto's voice was almost a whisper, but it carried the weight of finality. I'm not the same person anymore. I've seen the truth. Konoha is nothing more than a cage, and I've been living in it my whole life. The Umbu member stepped forward, his posture relaxed but prepared for anything. Naruto, I don't want to fight you. Please. Come back to us. That was the moment Naruto realized, he couldn't go back. No matter what the Umbu member said, no matter how hard he tried to convince him, Naruto was beyond saving. He was no longer the boy who had once dreamed of becoming Hokage, of protecting the village. He had seen the darker side of life now. The power he wielded, the illusions he could create, these were the tools of a new world, a world he would shape with his own hands. Naruto's Sharingan flared, and in an instant, the world around the Umbu member warped. The man's eyes widened in horror as Naruto's chakra flooded his mind, creating a complex illusion that trapped him in an unbreakable mindscape. You're not leaving here until you understand, Naruto muttered, his voice tinged with malice. I've made my choice. I will never be your weapon again. Inside the illusion, the Umbu member struggled. The world around him twisted, shifting in ways that defied reality. Naruto had created an intricate world, a prison of the mind that forced the man to relieve his failures. The shadows of Konoha loomed large, the faces of his comrades warped into expressions of anger and disappointment. The illusion was so real, so vivid, that the Umbu member's screams echoed in the real world, though he could not escape it. Why do you keep fighting for them? Naruto's voice echoed through the mindscape, each word like a lash against the man's soul. What did they ever give you but orders and betrayal? The Umbu's face contorted in anguish as he tried to resist, but it was futile. The world Naruto had created for him was inescapable. This was the power of the Sharingan, evolved beyond anything the Uchiha had ever known. It was more than just an illusion. It was a reflection of Naruto's anger, his betrayal, and his desire to break free from the chains that had bound him for so long. But as the illusion continued, something inside Naruto flickered. A small, distant part of him that had once believed in the village, in his comrades, in the possibility of redemption. That part of him whispered that this wasn't the way. This wasn't who he was meant to become. For a moment, the power of the illusion wavered. The Umbu member, though trapped, began to speak through the crackling distortion. Naruto. You're not a monster. You're not like them. You don't have to be. The words were like a thread of light in Naruto's dark world. But it was too late. His resolve had been forged in the fires of betrayal and loss. The illusion tightened, and with the final surge of chakra, the Umbu's mind shattered, leaving behind only a hollow shell of the man who had once been his ally. Naruto stood alone in the wilderness, his heart heavy with the weight of what he had done. The battle had been won, but the cost had been steep. He was a rogue now, no longer bound by the ideals of Konoha or the expectations of those who had once cared for him. His power was unmatched, but it had come at the price of his humanity. And now, as he walked away from the shattered remains of the Umbu member, he wondered if he would ever find peace again. But deep down, he knew the answer. There was no peace for him, not anymore. He was the lone wolf now, a creature of the shadows, a force to be reckoned with. And as the wind howled around him, Naruto embraced the darkness, knowing that the path he had chosen was one he could never turn back from. The sky was a dull gray as Naruto traveled through the dense forests of the Land of Fire, his thoughts as clouded as the heavens above. He had long since left the familiar side of Konoha behind, yet the echoes of his past continued to follow him, each step further drawing him away from the village that had once been his home. In his chest, there was a heavy feeling, one of uncertainty, of isolation. He had broken away from the bonds that had once held him, but what had he truly gained? Power? Yes. Freedom. In a sense, but not the way he had imagined. As he walked, the wind whispered secrets through the trees, secrets he wasn't sure he was ready to hear. It had been days since he had left the last village behind, and the trail had become increasingly dangerous. The rogue bounty hunters, mercenaries, and even some shinobi had become more relentless in their pursuit, but he had brushed them aside without hesitation. His Sharingan had grown stronger, his mind sharper. The curse of his past, the tragedy of the Uchiha bloodline, had begun to feel less like a burden and more like a weapon he could wield. Still, despite the power coursing through him, there was a gnawing emptiness that lingered in his heart, a hollow space that he couldn't fill with power alone. It was in a secluded clearing that he first encountered them, remnants of the Uchiha clan, their eyes burning with an intensity that mirrored his own. They were no ordinary survivors, these were rogue Uchiha, the last of the clan's loyalists who had escaped the massacre. Their dark cloaks blended with the shadows, and their Sharingan eyes gleamed like crimson stars in the gloom. They had been watching him for some time, aware of his growing strength and the whispers of his bloodline's legacy. The leader, a tall man with a face shrouded in mystery, stepped forward, his eyes locking onto Naruto's with an intensity that made the air around them feel charged. "You are the one," the man spoke, his voice low and commanding. "The one Shisui spoke of, the one who will bring us back to power." Naruto's expression remained neutral, but inside, a flicker of curiosity sparked. Shisui. He didn't remember much about Shisui beyond the vague memories that had resurfaced in his mind since his awakening, but the mention of the name sent a shiver down his spine. "I'm not some tool to be used." The man's gaze softened, but there was an undeniable hunger in his eyes. "You misunderstand, Naruto. You are the key to reviving the Uchiha clan. Shisui's eyes, his ideals are within you. We've been waiting for someone like you, someone who can carry on the legacy." Naruto stared at the man, his heart pounding. The words were too familiar. The idea of a legacy, of power passed down through blood, was something that resonated with him deeply. The Uchiha clan had been ravaged by betrayal, power struggles, and the consequences of their ambition. But in those words, Naruto saw something else, an opportunity. An opportunity to learn, to understand more about his true potential. He was no longer just Naruto Uzumaki, he was something else now, someone with the blood of Uchiha coursing through his veins, a reincarnation of Shisui Uchiha, a bloodline that held the secrets of the past and the power of the future. "I'll listen," Naruto said finally, his voice hard and resolute. "But understand this, I won't be your pawn. I make my own path." The rogue Uchiha nodded, sensing the determination in Naruto's words, and led him to their hidden base, a sanctuary tucked away in the mountains, far from the reach of Konoha's eyes. There, Naruto began his temporary alliance with the remnants of the Uchiha clan. They shared their knowledge with him, revealing the dark history of their bloodline, the rise and fall of the clan, and the tragedy that had shaped their existence. As the days passed, Naruto's connection to the Uchiha bloodline grew stronger. He found himself spending hours studying the intricacies of their techniques, unlocking new powers within himself with each passing lesson. His Sharingan, once a tool for manipulation and control, had evolved further. His ability to see through the fabric of reality had become sharper, more refined. But the deeper he delved into the Uchiha legacy, the more he began to question his place in it. The rogue Uchiha showed him the history of their clan, starting with the rise of the Uchiha brothers, Madara and Izuna. They spoke of their ancestors, their ambition to create a world where the Uchiha stood at the top, ruling over all others. The thirst for power had always been a constant in the Uchiha bloodline, and the cycle of revenge and betrayal had continued for generations. The clan's downfall had begun with the death of Madara, the loss of the battle for supremacy, and the eventual massacre carried out by one of their own, Itachi Uchiha. Naruto listened intently as they spoke of Itachi's decision to massacre their own people for the sake of the village, and of the ultimate betrayal that followed. The darkness that had engulfed the Uchiha clan felt suffocating, and Naruto couldn't help but see the parallels between their ambitions and his own. He had long sought to break free from the constraints of Konoha, to create his own world, a world where he could rule without the interference of those who had once controlled him. But was he any different from the Uchiha? Were his ambitions of power and control merely an echo of their own? As the rogue Uchiha shared the full extent of their clan's history, Naruto was forced to confront the truth of his own path. He wasn't just a boy searching for freedom. He wasn't just a rogue shinobi trying to carve out his own destiny. He was, in many ways, the product of his bloodline, a reflection of the very ideals that had led the Uchiha to destruction. The rogue Uchiha, who saw Naruto as their hope for revival, spoke of their vision for the future. They believed that Naruto, as Shisui's reincarnation, had the potential to lead them to the revival of the Uchiha clan's former glory. They wanted to use his power to rebuild the clan, to create a new order, one where the Uchiha would no longer be hunted or oppressed, but would stand as rulers of the shinobi world. Naruto's mind whirled as he processed their words. The idea of a new world order, one where he could wield the power to reshape everything, was tempting. But he also understood the danger in such power. He had seen firsthand how unchecked ambition could consume everything in its path. He had already walked down that road once before, and he knew where it led, to destruction, to the same cycle of pain and betrayal that had consumed the Uchiha. As the days passed, Naruto found himself drawn deeper into the web of the rogue Uchiha's plans. They trained him, pushed him to unlock his full potential, and in doing so, they began to plant seeds of doubt in his mind. The more he learned about Shisui's memories, the more he began to question his own identity. Was he truly Naruto Uzumaki, or was he simply a puppet, a reflection of the past, shaped by the memories of those who had come before him? One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Naruto stood alone at the edge of the Uchiha compound, looking out over the vast expanse of the land. His eyes burned with the intensity of his Sharingan, the crimson glow reflecting in the darkness. He was no longer just an ordinary shinobi. He had the power to reshape the world. But the question lingered in his mind: would he become the very thing he despised, the embodiment of the Uchiha's ambition, trapped in the same cycle of power and control? The wind whispered through the trees, carrying with it the scent of the past. Naruto's heart heavy, he closed his eyes and let the memories of Shisui's ideals flood his mind. The ideals of peace, of sacrifice, of protecting the people he loved. But could he truly follow those ideals, or was he doomed to follow the same path as those who had come before him? The rogue Uchiha had given him a glimpse of the future, of a world where he held the power to shape everything. But in the depths of his heart, Naruto knew that this path would come with a cost. The power he sought was dangerous, and it threatened to consume him, to turn him into something he could no longer recognize. The choice lay before him, and as the stars began to twinkle in the sky above, Naruto knew that the reflection of the Uchiha bloodline had cast its shadow over him. The question now was whether he would embrace it or forge his own path. Would he become the reflection of the past, or would he create something entirely new? The road had been long, the wind carrying with it a chill that seemed to cut through the layers of clothing Naruto had grown accustomed to wearing. The rogue Uchiha group, with their dark and secretive ways, had become an unlikely alliance for him. They had their ambitions, their goals of restoring the Uchiha clan to its former glory, and they saw him as a means to that end. To Naruto, they were a strange mirror, reflecting parts of his own desire for power, for control, and for something more than what he had been given in the past. But, despite everything, he couldn't help but feel the weight of his choices pressing against him. His days with the Uchiha were marked by intense training, research into the deep history of his bloodline, and quiet reflection. The echoes of Shisui's memories, along with the legacy of the Uchiha clan, were constantly on his mind. But in the midst of all this, one thing had become clear: his power was growing, and so was his understanding of the destructive potential it held. What had begun as a quest for freedom, for self-determination, was beginning to look more like an unyielding hunger for control. He hadn't realized just how far he had fallen until he encountered Raijin. It was on a morning, as the sun struggled to break through the clouds, that they crossed paths. The rogue Uchiha group had made camp near a mountain pass, their campfire flickering weakly in the early light. Naruto had been training, pushing himself harder than usual. His Sharingan was active, and the new techniques he had learned were beginning to feel natural. But then, the air shifted. A bolt of lightning arced across the sky, striking a nearby tree with such force that it splintered in half. The crackle of electricity filled the air, and in the midst of it all, a figure appeared, a tall, imposing man whose presence seemed to command the very air around him. Raijin. He was dressed in a simple, yet worn, shinobi uniform, his eyes sharp with intensity and purpose. His hair, wild and unkempt, stood out like a halo of static electricity, crackling with the remnants of his jutsu. A scar ran down his left cheek, an unspoken testament to his experiences. The rogue Uchiha, recognizing him immediately, tensed, but it was clear that they did not consider him a direct threat, at least not yet. Naruto, however, was intrigued. There was something about this man's aura, something that felt familiar, yet entirely different. He had seen and felt power before, but this man radiated it in a way that unsettled him, even as it piqued his curiosity. "You've been causing quite a stir," Raijin said, his voice deep and gravelly. He was looking directly at Naruto, a knowing glint in his eyes. "You're different. Powerful. But also dangerous. And I don't think you even realize just how dangerous." Naruto's eyes narrowed, his guard instinctively rising. "And who are you to judge?" he asked, though there was no real aggression in his tone. He had learned long ago to trust his instincts, and right now, they told him to stay cautious. "I'm not interested in your judgment." Raijin chuckled, an unsettling sound that resonated with an almost predatory undertone. "Judgment? No. I'm not here to judge you, kid. I'm here because I see potential. You're walking a dangerous path, but if you're willing to listen, I can teach you to control that power. You're still young, still wild. Power like yours untamed, uncontrolled, it'll consume you. It has before." Naruto felt something stir inside him. The idea of someone offering him guidance, especially when it came to his growing power, was tempting. But something about Raijin's presence unsettled him. This man wasn't someone who merely handed out wisdom for free. There was something more here, something Naruto needed to figure out. But then again, maybe that's why he had left Konoha, to find answers, to become something more. And if this man could help him harness the power that was threatening to spiral out of control, maybe it was worth the risk. "I don't need anyone to hold my hand," Naruto said, though the words came out more defiant than he intended. He knew that his pride sometimes clouded his judgment, but there was truth in his statement. He wasn't a child anymore, Wasn't someone who could be told what to do. Raijin raised an eyebrow, his eyes scanning Naruto with an almost knowing smile. Fine. You don't need me. But how long do you think you'll last with that attitude? You're not invincible, boy. Even the strongest need to learn how to control their power, or they burn themselves out. There was a brief silence between them, broken only by the distant crackle of the rogue Uchiha's campfire. The tension was palpable, thick with the weight of unspoken truths. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Naruto spoke. Fine. I'll take you up on your offer. But don't think I'm some pawn you can control. Raijin's grin widened, and a spark of approval flickered in his eyes. Good. You've got the right fire in you, kid. Let's see how long you can keep it under control. And so began the unlikely alliance between Naruto and Raijin. The training was brutal. Raijin wasted no time in pushing Naruto to his limits, testing him with each passing day. The rogue Uchiha watched from the sidelines, intrigued but wary of the outsider's influence. For Naruto, the days blurred into one another, marked only by the increasing intensity of his training and the growing awareness of the destructive potential that lay within him. Raijin taught him to harness his lightning chakra in ways Naruto had never imagined. The raw, electric power coursed through his body, crackling along his fingertips and flooding his veins. Raijin's techniques weren't just about control, they were about melding the chakra with his Sharingan abilities. At first, it was disorienting. The lightning, so wild and chaotic, seemed to clash with the controlled precision of his Sharingan. But Raijin pushed him, making him stretch his limits further than he ever thought possible. Feel the energy, Raijin would say, his voice a constant presence in Naruto's mind. Let it flow through you, not as a foreign force, but as a part of you. The more you fight it, the harder it will be to control. Embrace it. Become one with it. Naruto's body hummed with the energy of the jutsu, his Sharingan spinning wildly as the lightning surged around him. He could feel the power, the raw energy, coursing through every fiber of his being. It was intoxicating. The thrill of power, the feeling of absolute control, sent a rush of exhilaration through him. But with each surge of lightning, each strike of energy, a darker part of him began to awaken. His thoughts shifted, unbidden. He began to see the world differently, not just as a place of conflict but as something to be reshaped, molded to his will. Every spark of lightning was a reminder that he had the ability to change everything, burn away the old and usher in the new. It was a seductive thought, one that he tried to push aside, but it lingered like a shadow in the corner of his mind. Raijin noticed it too. His sharp eyes were constantly on Naruto, reading his every movement, every shift in energy. He could see the change in Naruto, the way the power was beginning to consume him. After one particularly grueling training session, where Naruto had nearly collapsed from the sheer strain of maintaining the lightning jutsu, Raijin pulled him aside. You're getting stronger, Raijin said, his voice firm but laced with concern. But strength without control is a curse. You think you can reshape the world? You're walking a fine line, kid. That kind of power unchecked, unbalanced, it will consume you. Don't think you can control it forever. Naruto's breath came in heavy pants, his body sore and exhausted. He looked at Raijin, feeling a flicker of something resentment, maybe. Was this man questioning his ambition? His desire to reshape the world? To control his destiny? I don't need to be lectured, Naruto replied, though his voice lacked the usual conviction. Raijin's words had struck a chord, and he hated the fact that they had. Raijin sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't have to listen to me. But remember this, power without purpose, without restraint, it's just destruction. And that's a path you don't want to walk down. Naruto turned away, unwilling to confront the doubts that were beginning to take root inside him. He wasn't ready to admit that Raijin might be right, that the power he sought could easily consume him if he wasn't careful. But deep down, he knew Raijin wasn't wrong. The question was whether he could find the balance between power and control before it was too late. And as the days passed, the alliance between Naruto and Raijin began to evolve. They weren't just training anymore. They were shaping each other, pushing each other toward a future that was as uncertain as the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. The hidden mist village lay before him, shrouded in mist and mystery, a place where secrets were buried in its cold, damp streets. Naruto had heard rumors of the forbidden techniques hidden within its depths, jutsu that could bend the fabric of reality itself, that could elevate him beyond even the most godlike of powers. His journey had taken him to many places, but none like this. The hidden mist had always been a land of shadows, its leaders ever so enigmatic, and its alliances, delicate. Now, Naruto sought to add another weapon to his arsenal, and he would stop at nothing to get it. Walking through the village gates, the air was thick with tension. There was a faint smell of salt from the ocean nearby, mingling with the dampness of the fog. The village was eerily quiet for a place so renowned for its blood-stained history. But Naruto was used to the silence. He had learned long ago that silence often meant there was something or someone waiting just beyond the edge of sight. He didn't know what to expect, but he wasn't here to make friends. He had a mission, to gain more power, to push himself to his limits, and beyond. Kotoamatsukami, the technique he had unlocked during his time with Raijin, was only the beginning. It was a tool, but not the weapon he was searching for. In the hidden mist, there was a forbidden jutsu, said to enhance his abilities to the point where he could control entire villages with nothing more than a thought. And Naruto, with his growing hunger for power, wanted it. More than anything, he wanted to transcend the limitations of his mortal body. As he moved through the village, a sudden presence made itself known. The air shifted as a woman, confident yet composed, approached him with a calm demeanor. Mai Terumi, the leader of the hidden mist, stood before him, her sharp eyes scanning him as if trying to measure the very depths of his soul. Her crimson hair cascaded around her shoulders, and her robes were adorned with the insignia of her village. Despite her beauty, there was an undeniable strength in her presence, a power that radiated from her. "You're Naruto Uzumaki," she said, her voice smooth and authoritative. "I've heard of you. Your reputation precedes you." Naruto met her gaze, his own eyes burning with the same fire that had been growing inside him for months. "I'm here for information. Forbidden jutsu, ones that could help me unlock my full potential. I've heard your village has such secrets." Mei's expression softened ever so slightly, though her eyes remained sharp. "You are bold, I'll give you that. But you must understand, power comes at a cost. And the jutsu you seek, the ones you speak of, are not to be taken lightly." Naruto smirked, the corners of his mouth curling upward. "I've never been one to shy away from a challenge." Mei's gaze hardened as she studied him. She was no fool, she knew that there was more to this boy than met the eye. He was strong, yes, but there was something dangerous about him, something that hinted at a darkness that threatened to consume him. Despite his power, he was reckless. And if he wasn't careful, he would fall prey to the same mistakes that had led to the fall of many great shinobi before him. "I might be able to help you," Mei said after a long pause, her voice laced with caution. "There is a forbidden technique, a jutsu that could enhance the power of your Kotoamatsukami. But it comes at a price. Are you willing to pay it?" Naruto's eyes gleamed with determination. "Tell me what I need to do." She eyed him carefully, assessing his resolve. "There is a rogue faction within my village, a group of shinobi who seek to undermine my rule. They've grown powerful, and if left unchecked, they could tear the village apart. I need you to help me deal with them. In return, I'll give you the information you seek. But be warned, this mission will test you. If you fail, it could be the end of your journey before it even begins." Naruto's mind raced. Mei Terumi was offering him exactly what he wanted, the forbidden jutsu that could take him to the next level. But the price she demanded was not small. She wanted him to kill, to eliminate those who stood in her way. A part of him hesitated, but only for a moment. His thirst for power had always been stronger than any moral qualms he might have had. Besides, he had already crossed lines that few would dare to approach. What was a little more blood on his hands? Fine, Naruto agreed, his voice cold and unwavering. I'll help you. But I want that jutsu. Mei studied him for a moment longer, then nodded. Very well. Follow me. The two of them moved swiftly, their steps quiet but purposeful as they approached the meeting point for the rogue faction. It wasn't long before they found a hidden base, tucked away beneath the village's old ruins. Naruto could feel the tension in the air, thick with the anticipation of an impending battle. The rogue shinobi were well trained and prepared, but they were no match for what Naruto had become. Together, they infiltrated the base under the cover of darkness. The rogue shinobi were caught off guard at first, but it didn't take long for them to realize they were being hunted. A battle erupted, and Naruto, alongside Mei, tore through their ranks with brutal efficiency. His strength was overwhelming, his lightning-infused chakra coursing through his body with each strike, each jutsu. Mei's own techniques, a mix of water and lava release, complemented his ferocity, making their combined assault unstoppable. But as the battle raged on, Naruto began to feel something stir within him, a familiar, dangerous feeling. The temptation to use his Kotoamatsukami on the rogue shinobi became overwhelming. It would be so easy, so effortless, to bend their wills to his own, to force them to turn on one another, to erase their resistance without lifting a finger. He could see it in his mind's eye, their eyes glazing over as he twisted their thoughts, made them his puppets. The power was intoxicating, far more than he had ever imagined. For a moment, he even considered it. What was the point of fighting, of wasting energy on meaningless struggles, when he could simply make them obey him? But then, a voice broke through his thoughts, Mei's voice, sharp and insistent. Naruto. Don't. You'll lose yourself. It was too late. His Sharingan spun wildly as he activated Kotoamatsukami. He could feel the control slipping into his grasp, the rogue shinobi before him starting to fall under his influence. But something felt wrong. The rush of power was no longer thrilling, it was suffocating. His body trembled, as if the weight of what he was doing was starting to catch up to him. He was so close to losing himself completely. Mei's voice was a sharp slap to his senses. Stop. This is exactly what I warned you about. You can't control it. You'll burn yourself out if you keep going like this. Naruto gritted his teeth, trying to fight against the pull of his own desires. The temptation was so strong, the power so overwhelming. But Mei's words cut through the fog of his mind, and he forced himself to release the technique, shuddering as the rogue shinobi broke free from his hold. Breathing heavily, Naruto turned to face Mei. You were right, he muttered, his voice low. I almost lost it. Mei stood there, her expression hard but filled with an understanding that Naruto didn't quite expect. This is the price of power, she said quietly. You want more, but it will cost you. It always does. You have the potential to reshape the world, to become something greater than any shinobi that has come before you. But you have to ask yourself, at what cost? How much of yourself are you willing to sacrifice? Naruto looked down at his hands, the feeling of power still lingering in his fingertips. He had gained so much, but Mei was right. He could feel it, the darkness, the hunger, always there, always threatening to consume him. He had thought power would be the key to everything, but now, he wasn't so sure. The mission was a success, the rogue faction eliminated, but the battle within him was far from over. As he stood beside Mei, he realized that the greatest enemy he faced wasn't the rogue shinobi, or any of his enemies, it was the darkness within himself, the price of the power he sought. And no matter how far he went, that price would always be waiting for him. Naruto stood alone, facing a group of figures that had once been a part of his family, a part of the Uchiha clan. Now, they were nothing more than shadows of the past, rogue remnants of a bloodline that had long since strayed from its ideals. Their faces, twisted with a mix of anger and desperation, all glared at him with eyes that betrayed their deep hunger for power, for control. They had come to claim what they believed was rightfully theirs, to force him to bend to their will. He had known this day would come. The Uchiha clan had always been tied to his fate, especially after the day he unlocked the Sharingan. They had always watched from the shadows, waiting to see if Naruto could fulfill the promises of their bloodline, if he could be the one to restore the Uchiha to their former glory. But what they didn't understand was that Naruto's path was not their path. He had no interest in restoring anything. His goals were much more personal, much more destructive. The rogue Uchiha, led by a figure that Naruto recognized but hadn't seen in years, Sasuke Uchiha, stood before him. His eyes were filled with a cold fire, one that mirrored Naruto's own. They had both walked a path of destruction, but Sasuke's thirst for vengeance had consumed him, leaving him little more than a puppet of his own rage. Now, he sought to use Naruto as a means to an end, to bend him to the ideals of the old Uchiha. "You are the key," Sasuke said, his voice low and filled with malice. "The key to restoring the Uchiha. Your power, your Sharingan, it is the missing piece. We need you, Naruto. Join us, and we will rebuild everything." Naruto's eyes narrowed, the red of his Sharingan gleaming as he stood tall. "I'm not your tool, Sasuke. I'm not anyone's tool. You're wasting your time." The Uchiha's eyes burned brighter, their chakra flaring as they prepared for battle. Naruto could feel the weight of their collective power pressing down on him, but he stood firm, determined to prove that no one could control him, not even his own bloodline. The battle began in an instant, with the rogue Uchiha charging forward, their movements swift and precise. Sasuke was at the forefront, his own Sharingan activated, his eyes flashing with determination. But Naruto was faster, more powerful. With each movement, he adapted, his Sharingan allowing him to predict their every attack, every move. His lightning-infused chakra crackled around him, his body a blur of speed and destructive force. But the rogue Uchiha were not weak. They had their own abilities, their own techniques honed over years of training and bloodshed. The air was filled with the sound of clashing jets of fire, lightning, water, and wind, all combining in a brutal symphony of destruction. The Uchiha fought with the conviction of those who had been betrayed, those who had lost everything. But Naruto fought with something darker, something more primal. He fought with the hunger for power, the need to prove that he was untouchable, unbreakable. As the battle raged on, Naruto could feel his body beginning to push past its limits. The power coursing through him was immense, overwhelming even, and his Sharingan continued to evolve, growing stronger with each passing second. But there was something else, something deeper. The memories of Shisui Uchiha, the last remaining Uchiha who had tried to preserve the ideals of the clan, began to flood his mind. Shisui's face appeared in Naruto's mind, his eyes filled with sorrow, his voice echoing in the back of Naruto's consciousness. "Protect the village, protect the people, even if it costs you everything." Naruto stumbled, momentarily taken aback by the flood of emotions that surged through him. He had never truly understood Shisui's ideals. To protect the village, to protect others at any cost, seemed like a distant, naive dream. But as he fought, as he unlocked the final stage of his Sharingan, those memories became more vivid. He could feel Shisui's pain, his unwavering belief in his cause, his willingness to sacrifice everything for the greater good. And for the first time, Naruto felt a pang of doubt, a seed of regret that began to grow within him. In that brief moment of hesitation, one of the rogue Uchiha Kaido, a powerful shinobi who had been Shisui's closest friend, lunged at Naruto with a kunai, aiming for his heart. Naruto's eyes snapped back into focus, and before the weapon could reach him, he caught it mid-air, his Sharingan glowing with an intensity that could have shattered the very earth beneath him. With a twist of his wrist, he sent Kaido flying, the rogue shinobi crashing into the ground, defeated. But the battle wasn't over. Sasuke stepped forward, his eyes colder than ever, his anger palpable. "You'll never understand," he spat, his hand forming a series of seals. "The Uchiha have always been destined for greatness. We are meant to rule." Naruto clenched his fists, his breath heavy as he faced Sasuke. The weight of Shisui's memory hung over him, the legacy of the Uchiha clan pulling at his heart. But he couldn't let it control him. He couldn't allow himself to be swayed by ideals that had already led so many to ruin. "I don't need to understand," Naruto said, his voice firm. "I've already decided. I'm going to make my own path. I'm not going to follow anyone's ideals. Not even Shisui's." With that, Naruto unleashed the full might of his power. His Sharingan burned brighter than ever, and his chakra flared around him like a storm. He met Sasuke head-on, their powers colliding in an explosion of energy that shook the very air. The fight was a blur of speed and precision, their movements faster than the eye could follow, their jutsu clashing in waves of destruction. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The world around them was reduced to nothing but the two of them, locked in a struggle for dominance. Sasuke's eyes burned with the desire to defeat Naruto, to bring him under his control. But Naruto's eyes were filled with something else, something darker. His desire to be free, to break free from the chains of his past, was stronger than anything else. In the end, it was Naruto who emerged victorious. With one final, devastating blow, he struck Sasuke down, his body collapsing to the ground in defeat. The rogue Uchiha, witnessing their leader's fall, hesitated for a moment before retreating, leaving Naruto standing alone amidst the wreckage of their final battle. As the dust settled, Naruto's breathing was heavy, his body aching from the intensity of the fight. But it was the emptiness that lingered in his chest that weighed most heavily on him. He had won, yes. But at what cost? He had defeated the rogue Uchiha, but he had also been forced to confront the very ideals that had driven him to this point. The legacy of the Uchiha, the memory of Shisui, had torn at his soul, forcing him to question everything he had fought for. He looked down at his hands, his Sharingan still glowing faintly in the dim light. The power was intoxicating, but it came with a price. The path he had chosen was one of destruction, and he knew that there would be no turning back. But even as the weight of that realization sank in, Naruto couldn't help but feel a strange sense of relief. For the first time in his life, he was free. Free from the expectations of others, free from the shackles of his past. And yet, as he stood there, the final remnants of the Uchiha clan scattered around him, Naruto couldn't shake the feeling that he was more alone than ever. The battle was over, but the war inside him was just beginning. The questions, the doubts, the fears, they were all still there, swirling inside him, refusing to let go. Naruto took a deep breath, his eyes still burning with the power of the Sharingan. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear, he would continue on his path, no matter the cost. The world would tremble beneath him, and nothing, no one would stand in his way. Naruto stood at the edge of the world, the weight of his power pressing down on him, making his every breath feel like a challenge. The shadows were his allies now, whispering secrets of the world as they twisted around his growing empire. His influence had spread far beyond a hidden leaf, beyond the walls of any one village, reaching the furthest corners of the shinobi world. What began as a thirst for vengeance, a simple desire to prove his worth, had now turned into a movement. An underground network of rogue ninjas, mercenaries, and dissidents from every village, every faction, had begun to rally under his banner. They followed him not because of his bloodline or because of his past, but because he offered them something none of the 5 great villages could: freedom, Power. Naruto's gaze swept across the room, filled with men and women who had once been discarded by society, rejected by their villages, forced to live in the shadows. Now, they were his, bound by a singular cause. A cause that was as old as time itself, the will to dominate, the will to break free of weakness, and the will to rule. The cavernous underground hideout buzzed with activity. Maps of the 5 great villages adorned the walls, their secret paths and hidden weaknesses marked in dark ink. The hushed murmurs of his followers filled the air as Naruto leaned against a stone pillar, his mind racing with plans, schemes, and potential alliances. He had not built this army by simply force. No, Naruto had become a symbol, a figurehead. His name carried weight now, a legend whispered on the winds, spreading fear among the weak and admiration among the strong. People believed in his vision. People believed in him. One by one, they had come to him. Deserters from the hidden cloud, rogue ninjas from the hidden sand, mercenaries who had lost their way, and those who had been cast aside by the very villages they had sworn loyalty to. They came to him with nothing but broken dreams and a desire to destroy the systems that had abandoned them. And Naruto offered them a home, a place where their strength would be respected, where their weaknesses would no longer be exploited. But as the movement grew, so did the eyes that watched it. The 5 great villages had begun to take notice of his growing influence, and the whispers in the shadows turned into urgent discussions in the councils of the most powerful leaders. Their shinobi forces were still mighty, but there was a shift in the air. The winds of change were no longer blowing in their favor. Their fear was palpable. They knew what Naruto was capable of, what he had become. And they knew that if left unchecked, his power could destroy everything they had worked for. In the hidden leaf, the Hokage's council convened in secret meetings, their faces grim with worry. In the hidden cloud, Raikage clenched his fists as he stared out at the stormy sky. In the hidden mist, Mai Terumi watched the horizon with a sense of foreboding. Across the land, the leaders of the villages made their moves, sending covert operatives, gathering intelligence, trying to uncover what Naruto was planning. It was only a matter of time before they would have no choice but to confront him directly. But Naruto wasn't worried. He had known this day would come. He had known that they would come for him, that they would try to stamp out his vision before it could fully take shape. But he was ready. His power had grown beyond anything he had ever imagined, and it was time to take the next step. His eyes gleamed as he stood up straight, his crimson Sharingan reflecting the dim light in the room. He had long since surpassed Shisui Uchiha, the man whose legacy had once guided him. His powers, now evolving beyond even the bloodline of the Uchiha, were far more dangerous than anyone could fathom. The techniques he had unlocked were not just those of the Uchiha clan, they were something new, something he had forged through his own will, his own hunger for power. Naruto was no longer just a product of his lineage. He was the master of his own fate. As he walked to a table, his followers fell silent. His mere presence commanded respect, and they all knew that what came next would be a momentous occasion. It was time to prepare for the next phase. It was time to build an army that could take on the 5 great villages. He addressed the room, his voice calm but filled with an undeniable power. "The time has come," he said. "The time to rise against the old world. The time to forge a new order. We will no longer bow to the weak. We will no longer live in the shadows. We will strike when they least expect it. We will crush them, one by one." His followers erupted in applause, their cheers echoing off the stone walls. They believed in him, and he could see it in their eyes. They were hungry for the same thing he was: power, freedom, a world where only the strong could survive. They were willing to follow him to the ends of the earth, to burn everything down in the name of their new world. But Naruto knew that the road ahead would not be easy. The leaders of the 5 great villages would not just stand idly by. They would fight back, and they would fight hard. The inevitable confrontation was drawing closer. His power had grown, Yes, but so had theirs. They would not let their control over the shinobi world slip away without a fight. Still, Naruto's resolve remained unshaken. He had walked this path alone for too long, and now, he had an army at his back, an army that would crush any opposition. But even as his confidence swelled, a quiet loneliness settled in his heart. He had built this movement from nothing, but he had lost everything that had once meant something to him along the way. His friends, his comrades, his village gone, all sacrificed for the pursuit of his ultimate goal. But Naruto pushed the thought aside. There was no room for sentiment in this world. Power was all that mattered. And with his growing influence, he had already begun to see the cracks in the existing system. The old world was crumbling beneath its own weight, and he would be the one to tear it down. The night passed in a blur of planning, strategizing, and gathering intelligence. Naruto honed his abilities even further, unlocking new levels of power that even he hadn't anticipated. His Sharingan had evolved into something far more powerful, a tool that allowed him to see the world in ways no one else could. His control over his chakra was unmatched, and the techniques he had mastered made him an unstoppable force. But with every new level of power he unlocked, the weight of his choices grew heavier. The people he had once cared about, the bonds he had once forged, all seemed like distant memories now. He was no longer the Naruto of old. He was something else, something far darker. His path had led him to this point, and there was no turning back. As dawn broke over the horizon, Naruto stood on the balcony of his hideout, looking out over the vast landscape that stretched before him. The world seemed small, insignificant, compared to the vision he had for it. He was no longer the boy who had dreamed of becoming Hokage. He was something greater. Something unstoppable. And as the storm clouds gathered on the horizon, Naruto knew that the world was about to change forever. The gathering storm had begun, and soon, the 5 great villages would learn that their time was up. The air over Konoha had always felt different to Naruto. It was thick with memories of pain, of rejection, and yet of fleeting moments of warmth and camaraderie. He had spent his whole life in this village, battling for recognition, fighting for acceptance. But now, the weight of his newfound power made the idea of the village, once his home, feel insignificant. His dreams had changed, evolved. And now, he was ready to tear everything down. Naruto stood at the edge of a hill, his gaze fixed on the hidden leaf village below. The familiar rooftops of the village where he had once trained, fought, and bled, now seemed like nothing more than a distant memory. A monument to his past. It was time to destroy it all. The Hokage, the council, the villagers, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was his vision, his hunger for power, for freedom from the shackles that had once bound him. He could feel his forces moving through the forest behind him, a sea of shadowed figures who followed him with unwavering loyalty. His underground army had grown stronger with every passing day, a force to be reckoned with. Mercenaries, rogue ninjas, disgraced clans, they all stood by him, each with their own grudge against Konoha and the established order. Together, they were unstoppable. But it wasn't just the sheer number of his army that made him confident, it was his abilities. His mastery of the Sharingan, his control over the chakra coursing through his body, had evolved to levels no one had ever dreamed possible. His strength, his techniques, they were godlike. There was no challenge he couldn't overcome. No one in Konoha would be able to stand against him. The battle began before the sun had even risen, the first wave of his army moving through the gates of Konoha like a tidal wave, overwhelming the village's defenses with ease. Naruto stood at the front, his presence alone sending chills down the spines of the villagers who had once seen him as their hero. Now, they saw him as a force of destruction. The streets that had once been filled with life now echoed with the sounds of chaos. The defenders of Konoha, once among the strongest shinobi in the world, fought back with everything they had. But it was clear that this battle was already lost. Naruto's army was too powerful, too coordinated. They swept through the village with ruthless precision, taking out key positions, dismantling the power structure piece by piece. As Naruto walked through the village, his footsteps were the only sound that could be heard, the destruction of his enemies unfolding all around him. He passed familiar landmarks: the Hokage Monument, the Academy, the ramen shop where he had spent so many lonely days. And each time, the memories threatened to rise up inside him, but he shoved them down. This was no longer his home. This was a symbol of everything that had wronged him, everything that had held him back. It wasn't long before the first of Konoha's strongest shinobi appeared to challenge him. Tsunade, the fifth Hokage, stood in his path, her eyes blazing with the fury of a leader who would do anything to protect her village. But Naruto knew that her fury would not be enough. "You've grown strong, Naruto," Tsunade said, her voice filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "But this is where your path ends." Naruto's eyes gleamed with cold resolve. "I've already decided. Konoha dies today. All of it." With a flick of his wrist, the battle began. Tsunade charged forward, using her immense strength to strike at Naruto, but he effortlessly dodged every blow. His Sharingan flared to life, predicting her every move. She was fast, powerful, but she was no match for him now. His speed and strength were beyond anything she could comprehend. He grinned, his eyes narrowing. "Is this really all you've got, Hokage?" With a single motion, Naruto used his advanced Sharingan abilities to warp space around her. Time slowed to a crawl, and Tsunade found herself paralyzed, unable to move. In an instant, Naruto was standing behind her, his fist connecting with the back of her head, sending her crashing into the ground with enough force to shatter the earth beneath her. She groaned, struggling to stand, but it was futile. Naruto's eyes locked onto hers as he stood over her, his presence overwhelming. "I won," he whispered, his voice low and cold. Tsunade looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of pain and regret. "I failed you, Naruto. I couldn't protect you from the world. But you don't have to do this." Naruto's gaze softened for a moment, but the moment passed quickly. "You should have protected me," he said, his voice now full of bitterness. "You should have known that I would be the one to destroy this village." Without another word, Naruto moved on. Tsunade lay motionless, her defeat complete. But Naruto didn't savor the victory. There was no joy in it, just emptiness. The battle continued as Kakashi and Sakura arrived, their expressions grim. Kakashi was the first to speak, his tone unwavering despite the clear fear in his eyes. "Naruto, this isn't the way. You were supposed to be the protector, not the destroyer." Naruto's eyes glinted as he regarded them both. "Protector," he scoffed. "The village never cared for me. It never protected me. I'm done being a puppet for their ideals." Without warning, Naruto unleashed his full power, the ground beneath him cracking from the force of his chakra. Kakashi and Sakura tried to counterattack, but it was useless. Naruto's speed was beyond him. His Sharingan allowed him to predict every move they made, every strike they attempted to land. In an instant, he was in front of Sakura, his fist crashing into her chest with enough force to send her flying backward. Kakashi stepped forward, his Sharingan flaring. He wasn't going to give up. Not without a fight. But even Kakashi, the copy ninja, couldn't keep up. Naruto's abilities were too advanced, his speed too overwhelming. Kakashi tried to land a hit, but Naruto's Sharingan allowed him to phase through space, avoiding the attack entirely. With a cruel smirk, Naruto twisted Kakashi's arm behind his back, forcing him to his knees. "You've always been a pawn, Kakashi. Just like the rest of them." Kakashi struggled but couldn't escape. "Naruto, this isn't you. Don't let the power control you." But Naruto didn't listen. He had long since abandoned the ideals of his youth. The village was nothing more than a stepping stone now, a place he once believed in but now saw for what it truly was, a cage. The final blow came swiftly. With the flick of his wrist, Naruto's chakra surged through Kakashi's body, rendering him unconscious in an instant. Sakura lay beside him, battered and broken. Naruto stood over them, his face expressionless, his heart numb. But the battle wasn't over. There was one last hurdle, the remaining Uchiha clan. They had arrived to try to stop him, to challenge his power. But like everyone else, they were no match. Even the mightiest members of the clan fell before him, their Sharingan abilities useless against his. His advanced version of the Sharingan allowed him to control them effortlessly, bending them to his will. They had no choice but to submit. Finally, Naruto approached the village council. The last remnants of Konoha's leadership, the people who had once been his family. The ones who had let him down when he needed them the most. The council members stood in front of him, fear in their eyes, but also defiance. "Naruto, you can't do this," one of them pleaded. "You were our hope. You were the one who would lead us to a brighter future." Naruto looked at them, his expression unreadable. "I was never your hope," he said, his voice icy. "I was your weapon. But no more." He reached out, his chakra crushing the very life out of the council members, leaving only ashes behind. The destruction of Konoha was complete. And as Naruto stood over the wreckage of the village, something stirred deep inside him. The weight of his actions, the cost of his power, was finally beginning to sink in. Was this really what he wanted? The destruction of everything he had once loved? The eradication of the village that had been his home? But even as these thoughts crossed his mind, Naruto knew that there was no turning back. His path had already been set in motion, and there was no stopping it. Konoha was gone, and with it, the last remnants of the world he had known. The new world was coming. And Naruto would be its ruler. The silence after the fall of Konoha felt almost suffocating, as if the weight of the village's destruction had seeped into the very air. The streets once teeming with life, the laughter of children, the bustling markets, and the crackle of heated debates among the villagers gone. Now, it was nothing more than a graveyard of broken dreams, a monument to the life Naruto had known and, ultimately, rejected. The shadow of the Hokage monument, now reduced to rubble, loomed over the remains of Konoha, a fitting symbol of the old world that had died with the village. The land itself seemed to mourn, the earth trembling beneath the boots of those who walked through the remnants of the village. But Naruto didn't feel the weight of grief. No, he felt nothing. His eyes, once filled with hope, had hardened into two cold, calculating orbs. His army, once a loose collection of mercenaries and rogue shinobi, now stood unified under his banner. They rallied around him with unquestioning loyalty, believing in the vision he had crafted, one where strength was the only currency, where only the powerful could rise and claim their place. With Konoha erased, Naruto wasted no time in consolidating his power. His rule was absolute, and he quickly set to work reshaping the world into something he could control. The new world order was simple, strength above all else. The weak were subjugated, forced into servitude to the strong, and the strongest were given command over territories, resources, and armies. Each day, new leaders were chosen, their power tested in brutal trials where only the most powerful emerged victorious. It was a system Naruto had designed to eliminate weakness, but as he enforced it, something inside him began to gnaw at him, a doubt that grew louder with each passing day. Naruto had always wanted to change the world, to make it a place where no one had to suffer the way he had suffered. But was this really the change he had envisioned? A world where everyone bowed to the strong, where might was the only law? It felt like a reflection of the darkness inside him, a darkness he had allowed to consume him. He had promised himself that he would never be like the people who had abused their power, but now, he was using that very power to crush anyone who dared to defy him. Despite the overwhelming loyalty of his followers, there were those who still refused to bow to him. In every village, there were whispers of rebellion, of those who believed in the old ways, who still clung to the ideals of peace and unity that Naruto had once cherished. They couldn't fathom a world where power was the only thing that mattered, and they fought back against his rule. These rebels, whether they were remnants of other villages or groups of disgruntled citizens, posed a constant threat to Naruto's vision. But to Naruto, this was no longer about ideals or dreams. This was about proving that he was the strongest, that no one could challenge his rule. He had created this world, and he would not let anyone tear it down. The first rebellion came from the Hidden Sand, a village that had always maintained a cautious distance from Konoha's politics but had never supported Naruto's rise. They sent a small but well-trained force to challenge him, believing that his reign could be overthrown. Naruto's response was swift and brutal. His forces met the Sand Ninjas in an open field, and the battle was over in minutes. Naruto, standing at the heart of the conflict, unleashed his full power. He didn't need strategy. He didn't need tactics. His mere presence was enough to tear through the enemy ranks. The ground trembled beneath his feet as his chakra exploded outward, sending waves of destruction through the battlefield. The Sand Ninjas didn't stand a chance. Their strongest warriors were obliterated with a flick of his wrist, their defenses shattered like fragile glass. By the time the battle ended, there was nothing left but bodies, burning husks of men and women who had dared to challenge him. The few survivors were left to crawl back to their village, broken and battered, a clear message to any other village that dared to oppose him. But Naruto felt no satisfaction. No pride. The victory was hollow, the screams of the fallen ringing in his ears as a constant reminder of what he had become. He had won, but at what cost? The following week saw more rebellions, more skirmishes, as other villages refused to accept his rule. The Hidden Mist, the Hidden Cloud, and even the remnants of the Hidden Stone all sent forces to try and reclaim their independence. But each time, Naruto met them with overwhelming force. His abilities, his power, grew with each battle. His chakra flooded the battlefield, bending the laws of reality itself to his will. He crushed entire armies with ease, his eyes burning with the intensity of his resolve. But with every victory, the weight of his choices grew heavier. His mind began to unravel under the pressure. The bloodshed, the carnage, it was never ending. And yet, every time he looked at the faces of those who followed him, he saw something in their eyes that unsettled him: fear. Fear of what he had become. Fear of what he might do next. Naruto's once loyal followers began to grow restless. They had followed him because they believed in his strength, his vision, but as his reign continued, they began to question his true purpose. The world he was creating was not one of order or unity, but one of terror. They had grown accustomed to his cruelty, but now, they feared it. They feared that he would turn on them next, that he would see them as weak and discard them like the rest. In private, Naruto often found himself alone, standing in the cold silence of his darkened chambers, his mind racing with doubts. He had always wanted to be the one who brought change, who created a better world, but was this really what he wanted? A world ruled by fear, by the might of his strength? Was this truly the legacy he wanted to leave behind? The faces of the people he had killed, Tsunade, Kakashi, Sakura, countless others, haunted him in his dreams. He saw their expressions, filled with confusion and sadness, as they fell before him. He had destroyed everything he had once loved, and for what? To be a god? To be feared? To be worshipped? The more he won, the more victories he claimed, the emptier he felt. His heart, once filled with dreams of a better world, was now nothing but an empty void, consumed by the darkness of his own making. He had created this new world, but it wasn't the world he had once imagined. It was a world of oppression, of suffering, and of solitude. And yet, there was no turning back. Naruto had become the Shadow King, the ruler of a world he had built with his own hands. He was untouchable, unchallenged, but he was also more alone than he had ever been. He had achieved his goal. He was the strongest. He had conquered the world. But in the quietest moments, when the battles were over and the blood had dried, Naruto couldn't help but wonder, was this really the price of power? Was this truly the future he had wanted? His world was filled with the echoes of the past, the ruins of Konoha, and the faces of those he had destroyed. His power was limitless, but it came at a cost, one that he was beginning to understand all too well. The world was his, but the loneliness was unbearable. The people who had once been his family, his comrades, were gone. And now, there was no one left to turn to. He had destroyed Konoha to create a new world, but in the end, the destruction had consumed him. The air crackled with tension, a storm building over the 5 great villages. It had been years since Naruto had forged his new world, one where the strong ruled, and the weak bent to their will. But even in the silence of his reign, the world was never truly at peace. Whispers of rebellion had turned into calls for unity, and now, the 5 villages that once clashed against each other had set aside their differences for one cause: to overthrow the Shadow King. The coalition, led by an alliance of powerful shinobi, had been formed. At its core was Sasuke Uchiha, now fully immersed in the darkness of his heritage. He had embraced the power of the Uchiha clan, and with it, the fire of revenge that had once burned within Naruto now ignited within him. Sasuke's eyes glowed with the intensity of the Sharingan, a mark of his strength and resolve. He was no longer the boy Naruto had known, a boy who sought vengeance but was still bound by the ties of friendship and loyalty. This Sasuke was a man of absolute conviction. He would stop Naruto, no matter the cost. The 5 villages had pooled their resources, summoned their strongest shinobi, and armed themselves for what would be the final confrontation. The forces aligned against Naruto were vast, and they had a single purpose: to dethrone him from his position of absolute power. But even with the strength of the coalition behind them, there was no denying the overwhelming might of Naruto and his army. His power was godlike, a force that had crushed every resistance that had dared to stand against him. His abilities had surpassed everything they had ever known, and the battlefield had become his kingdom. Yet, despite all his might, Naruto stood on the edge of something he couldn't control. Deep down, he felt the weight of his choices, the crushing isolation of his position, and the growing uncertainty about the path he had walked. He had defeated countless opponents, destroyed villages, and toppled the Hokage system, but at what cost? His victory had not brought the peace he sought, it had only led him deeper into darkness. The world had become his to command, but the people he had once known and loved had become little more than shadows, ghosts haunting his every step. The battle between the coalition and Naruto's forces was inevitable. It was not just a battle for supremacy, it was a battle for Naruto's soul. As the armies gathered on the outskirts of what remained of the Hokage monument, the ground trembled with the presence of the enemy. They had come for him, to end his reign of terror once and for all. Naruto stood at the center of the battlefield, his figure a dark silhouette against the blood-red sky. The winds howled around him, his cloak bellowing in the storm that seemed to mirror the chaos within his heart. His army stood ready, every soldier loyal to him, every warrior believing in the world he had created. But even they could feel the tension that hung in the air, the sense that this fight could change everything. It wasn't just about victory anymore. For Naruto, this battle was something more. It was the moment of reckoning, the moment he would have to face the consequences of his choices. And at the heart of it all stood Sasuke, the one person who had known him best, who had shared his pain and his dreams, and who now stood as his greatest enemy. Sasuke's figure emerged from the ranks of the coalition, his eyes locking with Naruto's across the battlefield. It was as if time itself had frozen. For a moment, there was nothing but the two of them, the past and the present, two souls bound by fate, now enemies with no path to reconciliation. Naruto's voice rang out, cutting through the tension. "So, it's come to this, Sasuke," he said, his tone flat, emotionless. You think you can defeat me? After everything I've done? After everything I've become? You think you can stop me? Sasuke's expression was unreadable, his Sharingan glowing with an intensity that seemed to burn through the air itself. I'm not doing this for myself, he replied, his voice cold. I'm doing this for the world. You were once my brother, Naruto. But you've become something else. Something I can't allow to exist. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his lips curling into a bitter smile. And what if you can't stop me? What will you do then? Will you kill me, Sasuke? Will you become the very thing you swore to destroy? The word stung more than Naruto had expected, but he refused to let it show. His gaze hardened, and the world seemed to tremble with the force of his will. This was it, the final confrontation. With a flash, the battle erupted. Sasuke moved like lightning, his body blurring as he activated the full power of his Sharingan. He summoned the full strength of his Uchiha bloodline, his eyes ablaze with the dark energy of the Mangekyo Sharingan. A massive surge of lightning chakras surged around him as he aimed a devastating strike at Naruto, the power crackling in the air like a storm. But Naruto was ready. His godlike abilities allowed him to anticipate every move, to see through the illusions and the deceptions that Sasuke threw his way. The air around him shimmered with energy as he effortlessly dodged the attack, his own chakra forming a shield that deflected Sasuke's blows. The ground shook as Naruto retaliated, sending waves of destructive force toward Sasuke. The very earth beneath them cracked and crumbled under the sheer power of their clash. The two shinobi were locked in a battle that seemed to defy logic. Their powers were unmatched, their skills honed over years of training and pain. But this was not just a battle of strength, it was a battle of ideologies. Sasuke fought for the restoration of peace, for a world free of the tyranny that Naruto had become. Naruto fought for control, for the world he had created, where power was the only currency. As the battle raged on, Sasuke's eyes burned with determination. You're lost, Naruto, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos. You've forgotten what it means to care about people. You've forgotten everything we fought for. Naruto's expression faltered for a moment, a flicker of doubt flashing in his eyes. Sasuke's words hit harder than any physical blow. In that instant, Naruto saw not just his enemy, but the friend he had once called his brother, the person who had shared his dreams and his pain. But those dreams had been shattered long ago, replaced by a cold, ruthless ambition. Care. Naruto repeated, his voice low. I've always cared, Sasuke. I've cared more than anyone. But look at the world now. Look at what it's become. The strong are the only ones left, and the weak have been cast aside. You think you can change that with your ideals? With your dreams of peace? Sasuke shook his head, his eyes filled with sorrow. It's not too late, Naruto. You're still the person I once called my friend. You can still change. You don't have to destroy everything to prove your strength. Naruto's hand clenched into a fist. It's too late for that, he muttered, the weight of his decisions crashing down on him. He didn't know anymore. He didn't know what he was fighting for. The battle intensified, but the emotional weight of their confrontation began to sink in. Each blow they exchanged was not just physical, it was a clash of everything they had ever believed in. Sasuke fought for the future, while Naruto fought for the past he had destroyed. And somewhere in the midst of the destruction, Naruto felt the faintest stirrings of the humanity he had lost, the humanity that Sasuke was desperately trying to pull him back to. But it was too late. With the final, devastating strike, Sasuke unleashed the full power of his Sharingan, his chakra flaring to its peak. Naruto staggered, his body overwhelmed by the force of the attack. For the first time in years, he felt vulnerable, exposed. And in that moment, he understood. Sasuke had been right. He had become the very monster he had once sworn to fight against. But it was too late to turn back now. The destruction was too great, the blood too deep. The battle ended not with a victory, but with a question. Naruto stood, battered and broken, facing the coalition and the world he had created. His heart felt heavy with the weight of his choices, but the path ahead was unclear. Would he continue down this path of destruction, or would he let the light of his past shine through the darkness? The world was waiting for his answer. The world lay in ruins, a silent testament to the destruction that had swept across the lands. Once vibrant villages were now little more than smoldering ashes, their hopes and dreams reduced to dust. The 5 great nations, united against a common enemy, had been shattered, their strength broken under the weight of Naruto's reign. The world had witnessed the rise and fall of empires, the clash of titans, and the endless cycle of bloodshed. Yet in the aftermath, there was no peace. Only a deep, unyielding silence. Naruto stood at the center of this devastation, his eyes gazing out over the barren landscape. The once proud Hokage monument, a symbol of Konoha's strength and leadership, now stood as a crumbled relic of the past. His own village, his home, was gone. The people he had once fought for were either dead, scattered, or crushed under the weight of his choices. The war had ended, but there was no victor in the traditional sense. No celebration, no cheers of triumph. Only the haunting echoes of the lives lost, the lives he had taken. The wind blew across the desolate plains, carrying with it the faint scent of burned wood and ash. The air was thick with the remnants of chakra and destruction, a reminder of the chaos that had consumed the world. The world that Naruto had sought to shape in his image. The world that now lay broken, a hollow shell of what it once was. As Naruto stood there, contemplating the aftermath of his reign, a figure appeared before him. At first, it was nothing more than a flicker in the corner of his eye, a shadow moving in the distance. But as the figure drew closer, Naruto's heart skipped a beat. He knew that presence. It was familiar, hauntingly so. The figure materialized before him, the form of a man draped in a cloak, his features obscured by shadows. But the eyes, those eyes were unmistakable. It was Shisui Uchiha, the man who had once been his friend, his ally, and who had died at the hands of those who feared his power. Shisui, or rather, the ghost of Shisui, stood before him now, a silent reminder of everything Naruto had lost. Everything he had become. You've come a long way, Naruto, Shisui's voice echoed in the stillness, gentle yet carrying the weight of 1,000 regrets. Naruto said nothing, merely standing in place as he looked at the man who had once cheered his dreams of a better world. The bond they had once cheered felt so distant now, like a dream that had faded with time. The Shisui he had known was gone, replaced by this figure, a specter, a memory. "Why are you here?" Naruto asked, his voice flat, devoid of the anger or hatred that had once consumed him. "What do you want from me now? Haven't I done enough? Haven't I destroyed enough?" Shisui's gaze softened, and he took a step forward, his presence filling the empty space between them. "I'm not here to judge you, Naruto. I'm here to show you something you've forgotten in the darkness of your journey. I'm here to show you the man you used to be, the man you could still be." Naruto's eyes narrowed, a flicker of defiance rising within him. "The man I used to be? That boy is gone. He died the moment I saw what the world really is. The world doesn't care about ideals, about dreams. It only cares about power. I learned that the hard way." Shisui's expression didn't change. "You may have learned how to wield power, but you've forgotten what it means to be human. You've forgotten what it means to love, to protect, to fight for something greater than yourself." Naruto shook his head bitterly, his eyes clouded with the weight of his past actions. Love? Protection? Those ideals died along with my innocence. I've seen too much blood, too much betrayal. I've watched people suffer for things they had no control over. I fought for a world that rejected me, and now I'm the one who has to bear the consequences of all of it. Shisui stepped closer, his voice softer now. But there is still a choice, Naruto. There's always a choice. You don't have to walk this path forever. You don't have to keep carrying the weight of your past, the weight of all the lives you've taken. You can choose something different. Something better. The words struck Naruto like a physical blow. He had been so certain, so sure of his path. For so long, he had believed that the only way to bring order to the world was through domination, through the assertion of strength. He had built a kingdom from the ashes, a world where power reigned supreme. But now, as he stood in the quiet ruins of his empire, Naruto couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something had gone terribly wrong. The power he had sought had not brought him peace. It had not brought him fulfillment. It had only deepened his loneliness, his despair. Shisui's eyes bore into him, as if searching for the remnants of the Naruto he had once known. You are not just the Shadow King, Naruto. You are more than that. You were once someone who dreamed of a better world, someone who fought to protect those he loved. You don't have to erase that part of yourself. You can choose to rebuild. To start anew. Naruto looked down at his hands, the same hands that had once held hope, that had once reached out for something greater. Now, they were stained with blood, their power only serving to further isolate him from the world. What is left to rebuild? He whispered, his voice cracking under the weight of his emotions. What can I build after everything I've destroyed? The world is broken, Shisui. There's nothing left. Shisui's gaze softened, and he reached out a hand, placing it gently on Naruto's shoulder. The world may be broken, but it can be mended. It's not about erasing the past, Naruto. It's about what you do from here. The choice is yours. You can continue on this path of destruction, to be the king of a broken world, or you can choose to heal, to help rebuild what you've torn down. The power to make that choice has always been within you. Naruto's mind raced as the words sank in. He had spent so long drowning in the belief that power was the only way to fix the world, that strength was the only thing that mattered. But now, standing here, with Shisui's words echoing in his mind, Naruto realized something he had been unable to see before. Power alone could not save the world. It could only destroy it. He had seen at firsthand how quickly a kingdom could crumble under the weight of its own ambition. Naruto closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his past decisions pressing down on him. For the first time in years, he felt the crushing weight of his loneliness. His power had given him everything he wanted, but it had also taken everything from him. He had built a kingdom, but in doing so, he had destroyed the very thing that made him human: his connections, his empathy, his love. A quiet resolve began to form within him. It was a small flicker, barely noticeable, but it was there. The choice had always been his. He could continue down the path of destruction, but what would that bring him? More power? More bloodshed? More isolation? Or he could turn away from it all, renounce the darkness that had consumed him, and seek a different path. A path that didn't rely on power, but on understanding, on connection, on redemption. Naruto opened his eyes, meeting Shisui's gaze once more. I choose to start over, he said, his voice firm, though tinged with sorrow. I choose to rebuild. Not through power, but through understanding. Not through domination, but through compassion. Shisui smiled, his eyes filled with pride. Then you've made the right choice, Naruto. The road ahead will be hard, but it's the only one worth walking. Naruto stood alone in the ruins of the world he had once sought to conquer, but now, for the first time in years, he felt something he had thought was lost forever: hope. The journey ahead would not be easy, but it would be his to walk. And perhaps, just perhaps, there was still a chance for redemption. As the wind blew across the broken landscape, Naruto took his first step toward the future. The past was gone, but the future, his future, was still waiting.